Give me big old buckets of butter beer. Give me big old barrels of butter beer. Give me the drink I love so dear. And another round for my friend right here of the sweet old butter beer.
Welcome to Three Broomsticks. We invite you to pull up a chair, grab a butterbeer, and settle in for a hearty discussion about Harry Potter. I'm Irvin Cateman. And for now, that's it. I'm Irvin Cateman. We actually have two guests on this episode, and Sophia was meant to be my other co-host. She's running a little late, so we will be hearing from her soon, I promise. But for now, it's me, and I can introduce our not one, but two fabulous guests to you listeners. So, first up, our guest is Beatrice Groves. Hi, Beatrice.
Hi, Irvin. Lovely to be here in the Broomsticks with you.
Lovely to have you here. So, whoever hasn't spent the last couple years reading all of your essays online about all things Harry Potter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I teach English at Trinity College in Oxford University. I actually normally teach Renaissance English, Shakespeare and things like that, but I've taken a little sideline, shall we say, into Harry Potter more recently. I blog at Batilda's Notebook on MuggleNet, and I've written a book called Literary Illusion in Harry Potter.
Fabulous. Yes, listeners, if you haven't read Beatrice's essays over at MuggleNet, they're so smart and, you know so much about so many books that I mostly haven't read. I'm always just so impressed.
Oh, thank you, Evan.
So tell us, as a Harry Potter fan, first of all, what's your Hogwarts house?
So I'm Ravenpuff.
Me too!
Hey!
Hi!
Hi, nice to meet you. It's the best house, isn't it? Best house.
It's a prerequisite for writing at MuggleNet. They only accept Ravenpuffs.
So yeah, that was it was Hufflepuff in the old Pottermore and Ravenclaw in the new one. But I think Huffleclaw sounds strange, so
I agree. It's definitely Ravenpuff.
Yeah, it's definitely.
What's your favorite Harry Potter book?
Prisoner of Azkaban, I think, is a sort of standalone book, but I'm not, the old not choosing between one's children. I'm very keen on all of 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7.
Okay, so just the middle.
The middle
doesn't do it for you.
It doesn't do it as much. No, that's right. I 6. I really felt was a return to form, and I think 7 is completely brilliant in how it ties everything up.
Yeah, and what's been your journey to the Potter fandom?
So I tried reading Philosopher's Stone when I was an undergraduate, when it came out. And like a number of people, I just didn't get on with that first chapter and I stopped reading. And I got married on the day that Goblet of Fire came out. And one of my guests said, "You're going to love Harry Potter. I'm going to buy you as your wedding present Goblet of Fire and the first 3. And you have to read them." And so I gave them another go and loved them. So that was sort of how I became a fan. And then I had this idea for writing a book about literary illusion in Harry Potter, which came from the evil cat, Mrs. Norris, in Philosopher's Stone. So when I read Philosopher's Stone, I just sort of thought, well, this is a reference to Mansfield Park. And how often do you get references to Mansfield Park in children's literature? Never. So that just struck me as interesting, and I thought a sort of way into Jane Austen for Rowling's fans, and that would be sort of fun to write down. And I just had a go sort of writing about it, and then discovered there was just so much to write about Austen and Harry Potter on its own. So that sort of, I wrote 10,000 words on that without sort of trying, and just sort of thought, maybe there's more here. So then I wrote Literary Illusion, which came out in 2017. And then I wasn't really part of the fandom at that point. I hadn't explored it online at all. And then because of that, I started writing blogs online and being invited to podcasts and things. And I've been a really keen enjoyer of sort of the online enthusiasm for Potter ever since.
Excellent. And Actually, we will get back to the other part of intros after I introduce our second guest. Listeners, our second guest is also a very smarty pants scholar of all things Harry Potter, Nick Jeffrey. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Irvin. Hi, Irvin. Really great to be here.
Really great to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am not really a smarty pants Potter scholar at all. I'm a middle-aged engineer who sort of reignited an interest in literature quite recently via Casual Vacancy, then All Things Potter, then All Things Strike.
That is mind-boggling to me that, like, Casual Vacancy was what brought you to Rowling. You know, I feel like sort of 95% of people it's Harry Potter, and then 5%, you know, really like mysteries, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone who came to it through Casual Vacancy.
Well, I used to read a lot in school, and I sort of gave up on literature in university. I mean, not reading. I've been reading nonfiction fairly consistently, but I just reached a point in my life, and I was gifted a copy of Casual Vacancy, and that just hit me like a freight train. That's
wow. Well, just because me personally, I didn't take to Casual Vacancy at all, really.
No.
And in fact, I think the only person I've ever met who liked Casual Vacancy was Sophia.
Irvin, you're outnumbered here. I like Casual Vacancy as well, so that's 3-1 if she were here.
Well, there it is then.
But it's very, I think it's very different coming to it post-Potter, which I wonder if one reason why Nick liked it more than most people is because he didn't come to it post-Potter. So I think it felt very weird. I read it a long time after it was published, so it didn't feel like, just coming to it, as I say, from the sort of warmth of Potter. And someone described Casual Vacancy as like if in the beginning of Harry Potter, Harry had died and you spent the rest of the novel with the Dursleys. And that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah.
Barry dies. You're like, why did you call him Barry? It's so close. And then you spend all your time with the Dursleys, and you think this is a very surprising way of writing when you've been used to. You know, Potter is full of so many really nice people, and Casual Vacancy, you really have to grub around to find those people. So it turns everything on its head. But I think they're still there a bit.
Fair enough. So Nick, what house are you?
Oh, I'm 100% Ravenclaw. I mean, completely. Not a bit of any other house. Try as I might to game the system, it always comes back Ravenclaw.
Yeah, you bleed blue and bronze.
Yeah.
And favorite Harry Potter book?
Oh, Deathly Hallows. I mean,
okay.
I'm a sucker for a quest anyway, but it is just such a monumental saga of a book.
That's awesome. You say you're not a smarty pants scholar, but the way you manage to research things, like, I mean, you're the one who found all the trademark stuff for Cormoran Strike titles and everything. I am so impressed at your Google foo skills.
So that's really sort of a bleed over for what I do as a day job. So I work for a company that makes broadcast cameras, and they are very complicated systems. And it is impossible for any one man to really know everything about all of the systems, which means I had to develop a talent of finding information really, really quickly. You know, and even that first step of there's something you don't know, well, okay, what would it look like if somebody knew it, and where to find that?
That's incredible. So this episode, we're not just talking about Harry Potter. We are also talking about Cormoran Strike. On this podcast, we're going to be occasionally branching out to talk about Harry Potter and other fandoms, other, books, maybe movies, TV shows. And I figured there's no better place to start than something also written by Joe Rowling. So before we get into the Cormoran Strike discussion, I figured we should also talk about your, fandom IDs as far as Cormoran Strike. So I'm curious, and I did just read these rankings online, but we may as well talk about them. Favorite Cormoran Strike book?
My favorite book is absolutely Ink Black Heart now. I think the first time I read it, it was definitely in the bottom half. Again, I read it far too quickly. And when I read any fiction, I like to throw myself into it. And I was reading it far too quickly to do that. My natural speed is a very slow reader. The second reread, it was definitely one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. But I think Troubled Blood probably pipped it at that point. And now the third reread, when I'm finally getting those hints within the chat logs, it's it's narrow, but now I think it's top of my list.
Yeah, the chat logs are much better in retrospect. Like, I really didn't like them when I first read Ink Black Heart, and now that I know what I'm looking for, now I was like, oh, that is clever. Oh, I see what's happening there. So I'm coming around on that topic. B, what about you?
And yeah, mine is Troubled Blood. But yeah, I've definitely enjoyed Ink Black Heart on the rereads more. And I suppose the first time you read it, just trying to keep the moderator Twitter handles, real life characters. There are 3 versions for every person. Almost it's quite a brain workout the first time. It's definitely easier when you know who they all are second time round. But yeah, Troubled Blood I thought was so creative in bringing the 1970s sort of alive and making you feel affection for Margot. For someone who's been dead 40 years, I thought that was a real tour de force.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's funny because my favorite strike is actually Lethal White. So between the 3 of us, we have the last 3 books.
Yeah. This is one of the things that links with Potter, the way that the first 3 are short, normal-sized books, and then from then on they become absolutely huge. And it's sort of strange that she's done it exactly book 4 with each one. But yeah, I get the feeling Lethal White is one of the least popular in the fandom. So that's an interesting. Why is that your favorite?
So I think it was a return to form for her. Basically, I like a cozy mystery. I like a dysfunctional family that's all yelling at each other at a country house, and someone ends up dead, but they all hate each other's guts. And yeah, after Silkworm and Career of Evil, which were both rough, Lethal White was enjoyable to read again. Even though it's longer, it's not as long as Troubled Blood and Ink Black Heart. I feel like Lethal White at its 600 pages is sort of that sweet spot of you can dive in and be enveloped by the story, but it's still sort of elegant and, there's not a lot of extra material in it.
Yeah.
So,
I had the same feeling about the violence, that I just had a sense of relief when I got to Lethal White, because I thought Queer of Evil was much worse than Silkworm, and then I thought, oh no, is it going to ratchet up every time? What's going to happen in Lethal White? It was going to be much worse than Queer of Evil, but as you say, no, it went back to Cuckoo's Calling sort of levels of there's a nasty murder, but apart from that, it doesn't bleed out.
Yeah, because Cuckoo's Calling is my other favorite. Yeah. It's that and Lethal White.
Cuckoo's Calling is very classic, isn't it? A real classic mystery. Which I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Well, and both of them have a lot of development for the characters, and Robin in particular. In Cuckoo's Calling, we see her coming into her own and becoming a detective. And then in Lethal White, she finally leaves him.
But so that's something I quite like about, I suppose, post-Lethal White, is that there's no Matthew anymore.
Oh, what a relief.
So we're not looking for a redemption arc for Matthew then?
No.
You know what? Joe could write one. I could believe she'd pull it off.
Well, we'll get onto this, but someone was talking about a redemption arc for Charlotte, and I'm no. Some people.
No way, no how.
No, that's right. Aunt Petunia was more chance of one than Charlotte. She didn't get one.
And I'm curious, what are your guys' favorite Strike characters?
So for me, it's the duo. Yeah, it's Strike and Robin together.
Okay.
Cheating, I know, but...
So I like Robin. I like the fact that Strike irritates me.
Yes.
Quite often.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that makes him a great character, is that he's got that rough edge. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interestingly unlike Harry. So I think Harry has this incredible smoothness that you almost don't readers don't almost realize that they are Harry, and they kind of, so he has this sort of anodyne presence in the fandom where people are not that interested in him because they always have been him in the story.
Yeah.
And that's not the case with Strike. So there's an aspect of that in Strike, but he's also a bit abrasive for the reader.
Yes.
Which is an interesting change.
Yeah. Well, it's because I would argue that of the two, Robin is sort of the clear audience surrogate.
Yeah.
Like Cuckoo's Calling opens with like her on the tube and her life changing and her like coming into this detective
I agree.
world.
I certainly agree that Robin is the Harry. She's the one who's transformed. So I've argued before, that her becoming a detective is like him discovering he's a wizard. It's the sort of really exciting time portal to transformation for her. And that's not the case for Strike, because he's sort of already there. He's already, he's the McGonagall or whatever, someone who's already in the place. But I think there's aspects that keep us apart from Robin, and obviously her relationship with Matthew is a big part of that. So we are not, she's not a reader surrogate for that. We're all going, what are you doing with this man? From the very beginning, where he won't let her, use an A to Z round London because she's going to get mugged if she uses an A to Z, and just everything he does undermines her. And you just like, before we meet him, we know that he's ghastly. And she can't see that.
he is very, very reminiscent of my cousin's husband. So like the minute I start, they separated for a year, and then she came back to him,
You're absolutely certain they don't listen to your podcasts?
Well, not now.
Yes, yes, I'm quite certain they don't listen. Also, I think he knows how I feel about him. I'm not that good at hiding my emotions.
I think everyone must know someone like that, though, and I think that's why that dynamic is so powerful in the stories.
Yeah,
and like so immensely frustrating because we've been there where we're like screaming at him like, no, leave him, like you're better than this.
And I suppose the only thing. In the books, he's absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. And I feel that obviously that's an essential, why on earth she'd ever started going out with him. And in the TV version, he's not. And you're like, you can't have Matthew unless he's drop-dead gorgeous, because this relationship would never have begun. Anyway.
It's kind of similar with Charlotte in the TV show.
Yeah.
Like, the actress they have playing Charlotte is, beautiful, but Charlotte's supposed to be like, an 11 out of 10, sort of take your breath away gorgeous.
Everyone, and she's ridiculous, but it's kind of fun, isn't it? That every time she walks into a room, everybody in the room goes, what? Yeah, where she's not, the actress is absolutely beautiful, but she's no more beautiful than Robin. But yeah. She should be, but they always have that problem with TV. They want the heroine to be the best looking person. So I just saying, Pride and Prejudice, they always have Jane isn't better looking than Lizzie usually, but she should be way better looking than Lizzie, Anyway.
But that's absolutely the same as the Potter adaptations for film.
Yes. They just always want pretty people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, in Goblet of Fire, in the books, it's like, whoa, Hermione can be attractive? And then in the movie, it's like, Emma Watson put on a dress. Yeah.
She was always attractive, and now she's in a dress. Yeah, and a pink dress. Do you remember that? That's so sad.
Yeah.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
No. So, this episode, we're not just doing Cormoran Strike, we are actually doing a narrower focus. So for episode 5, we're going to be discussing the parallels between the villains of Half-Blood Prince and the villains of Ink Black Heart, the 6 books in the respective series. So, listeners, if you're not deep in the Cormoran Strike fandom, like the 3 of us are, one of the really sort of popular theories in the fandom is that the 2 series are sort of running in parallel with each other, and that a lot of the Cormoran Strike series are sort of reflections or distortions of their Harry Potter counterparts. And so with Half-Blood Prince and Ink Black Heart, I think that was very much the case. You could see a lot of things in common, a lot of, sort of little nods and winks to Half-Blood Prince. And so that's sort of our jumping off point, and we're going to be zeroing in on the villains. So obviously at this point, a huge spoiler alert for Cormoran Strike. All the way through Ink Black Heart, we are going to reveal who done it, who the killer is, what the red herrings are. So, spoilers ahoy! You've been warned.
Just to say on the question of the parallels between the two series, that's been discussed a lot at Hogwarts Professor, and two of the people there, Louise and Evan Harris, used it predictively for the murder. So Lethal White was the one where so Evan did it for the murder in Lethal White, who is extraordinarily close to the murderer in Goblet of Fire. He is the son of the minister. So that one really, so he just the moment the Nerdwell son of the minister turned up, he was like, well, that's the murderer. And he was completely right. And Louise did it for Ink Black Heart, from the sort of lack of a twist. So
yes,
that sense in which it's the person you sort of know it'll be. So Gus just completely fits the profile of who we think Annabelle would be. And I suspect that a lot of other people just discounted him for that reason. I was like, oh, well, he's too obvious. Yeah. He's, a young, isolated man. That's what we think we're looking for. So I thought, is it his father? Is it his mother? That was who I was suspicious of these nice women turning around, because last time we were expecting a psychopathic man, it turned out to be a woman. So I thought, is she going to do that again? But actually, it was just the same as Half-Blood Prince. The twist was that you are so used to big twists now that you overlook the obvious. So I thought that was very clever.
The twist is there.
Exactly,
and
it
twist.
does work as a twist. You just sort of think, well, I'm expecting a big twist, so I just had discounted this person.
Yeah. So I think that's another reason I love Lethal White. I feel like for me, that was when the parallels came in, because the first 3 Strike series, sort of you're reading and it's like, well, they're fun mysteries, okay. And then in Lethal White, you're like, oh, we can bring this back to Potter. There's another layer here, and it's so much fun.
And I did feel that also with Silkworm. So that was one of those ones where the Riddle Diary and the Bombix Mori, I think that's a very close parallel of a sort of killer book within the book. And that also worked in terms of the chiastic form of both series, where we're expecting to see the second half echoing the first half. So I predicted, before it was written, that Ink Black Heart would have a text within the text. And again, that turned out to be completely true. And that's the same in Harry Potter, that Riddle Diary, the text within the text in Chamber, is echoed by the Half-Blood Prince's potions textbook in 6. So that was a really nice sort of 4-way link that one plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, listeners, this is essentially ring theory, but fancy.
So the big question is, if we accept that these series are parallel, why?
There you're asking.
I think for the fun of it.
It is a lot of fun.
For me, what I've been struck by is the Lightning Struck Tower, which is my absolute favorite chapter in the series, where Dumbledore is trying to talk Draco off a ledge, so to speak. And Ink Black Heart is pretty much the 3rd time we see that type of scene playing out. We definitely see it in Ichabod with Roderick Roach and how he sort of brought around to the good side. And then we see it here with Rachel and Robin. And for me, Lightning Struck Tower is so effective because you're reading it and it's no, if you give him 20 more seconds, he'll get there. Draco was lowering his wand. Every time I was maybe this time, the Death Eaters will just hold off 10 more seconds. It's like watching Titanic. Every time you hope it won't sink this time. And so I feel every time Joe sort of replays this scene, it's subtly different. It's different in terms of the threat the character's facing. It's different in the rhetorical strategy used to bring them around. So I feel for Joe, in a way, it's sort of writing fan fiction of her own work, where she's well, I wrote it this way, but what if we tweak?
I think also it just encourages readers to read elusively, encourage us to think of other texts when we're reading the text that we're reading. And that is just an inherently literary way of reading, and therefore is, satisfying in and of itself. And is a great thing that she's sort of encouraging that.
So listeners, before we dive into the discussion, if you want to, do some reading to get ahead of it, we have a few essays we can recommend to you. The genesis for this podcast and sort of how I came up with the idea is an essay I have over at Muglined called The Antagonists of Book 6. Where I essentially made a parallel between, the big bad of Ink Black Heart, Enemy, and what I would argue are the three big bads of Ink Black Heart. So we have that. Then, B, you had a great essay in the Rolling Library called The Ink Black Prince.
Thank you.
All about the parallels between the two books. I know, I feel like you and I are both being like, how can we fuse Half-Blood Prince and Ink Black Heart into a title?
Yeah.
How many permutations are there?
It does fit also with the way that the title does, Ink Black would normally be hyphenated, and that would have made such a good parallel with Half-Blood Prince. But
yeah.
But I wonder if that one was like, she thought, no, I'm not, I'm going to pull back from that.
Right, exactly. And then you also recently had an essay go up about vampires in Harry Potter and Half-Blood Prince, which was so great because I never thought about vampires in the book beyond just a giggle over Sanguini.
Yeah. There are a lot more than you think. Yeah,
read.
Thank you. I really glad. It's one of those ones where once you start looking, you think there's a lot more vampires than I realized. But yeah, that for me that was the sort of, there was a few moments where Ink Black Heart's link with Rowling's other output felt sort of almost edgy. And that was one of them for me. I was just that's, having a vampire that people want in the fandom, want in your text that you don't put in, seemed to me so close to all that Snape, please let Snape be a vampire fandom stuff that existed before the end of Potter. And I just thought that's so weirdly specific. So that felt like a real little nudge.
Yeah. I mean, by the end, Joe was having fun with the Snape as a vampire thing.
Yeah.
Like in the Battle of Hogwarts where you see him flapping with his giant black robes as he flies off.
Absolutely. I think, she's always said, and I think one of, something that makes Potter so popular is she always said from the very beginning, before she knew anyone else was going to read this stuff, she put in what she calls personal passwords. So references to her own life, references to dates, names that are important to her. So that sense of things which she sort of embeds in because they make her laugh, because she enjoys them, is absolutely crucial to the way she writes, I think. And it's one of the reasons that other people sort of can respond to that. She enjoys it herself. She puts it all in, not because someone else will spot it, but because she enjoys it.
Yeah. So before we dive into the discussion on this topic, this episode, we want to raise a toast to the discussion on one of our prior episodes. So over at our website, threebroomstickspod.com, we encourage you to, leave comments about all the things we're talking about in the episodes. So here we're raising a toast to the comments on episode 2. The episode was a discussion of the middle chapter of the Harry Potter series, Order of the Phoenix Chapter 6, Noble and Most Ancient House of Black. So we raise our glass to Absent-Minded Raven, who addressed the conversation we were having about sort of who knows Harry better, as his guardian, Sirius or the Weasleys. And Absent-Minded Raven said, regardless of whether Sirius or the Weasleys know Harry better, more salient here is that neither knows him well enough, or as well as they might think they do. Sirius, like Snape, and wouldn't both of them hate that parallel, conflates him with James. Molly forges ahead with, I've raised several teenage boys' expertise, without stopping to consider the particulars of this boy, and he is still a boy despite everything, though well I remember the desperate yearning to be treated as an adult. Arthur is more observant. He remembers a boy that went after a basilisk to save Ginny, hence warning him not to go after Sirius, but hasn't been around Harry as much, and as noted, mostly during quiet, relaxed times. He's more aware of what Harry has done, whereas Molly would rather forget, but not necessarily why. So, I thought that was a terrific comment that just, really summed up, all these Guardians' relationships to Harry, and sort of his frustrations in all of those relationships, because it's hard. Harry is yearning so much for parental figures, but it's hard to sort of jump in with a kid, who's almost a teenager and has as many issues as Harry does, and sort of try to extrapolate, how do I raise teenage boys? How do I raise Harry frickin' Potter? So yeah, I thought that was a great comment, and also the Sirius and Snape parallel just really amused me.
That really would annoy him, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, do you guys have any perspectives on sort of which of Harry's guardians knows him better, sort of Sirius or the Weasleys? Circa Order of the Phoenix.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. It's basically, isn't it, that they know different halves of him, so you get a sort of something closer to a complete picture from both of them. But absolutely, they're both. Molly is trying to keep him safe, and Sirius is, Snape. The people who criticize Sirius for feeling that he just sort of thinks he's James are completely right. And so, yeah, it's two very good perspectives.
Yeah. All right. And with that, let's dive into the main discussion. So I figured we can work our way from, the biggest bads to the, throwaway henchman villains. So, Enemy, the big bad of Ink Black Heart. I think what's so interesting about the parallel between Ink Black Heart and Half-Blood Prince is that in Half-Blood Prince, there are three separate antagonists in the book, right? Sort of, Snape is the killer. He's the one who commits the murder. Draco is the culprit behind the mystery. If the Harry Potter book's a mystery and it's who's behind all these attacks, what's going on, Draco's the culprit. And of course, Tom Riddle is the actual villain that you're spending Half-Blood Prince studying, where you're what is this psychopath like? What is he up to? How do we get into his mind? And so in Ink Black Heart, because there's only one big bad, all three are kind of one and the same in Gus Upcott. And I thought that was so interesting and so cleverly done. And it's kind of why I love the parallel series thing, because it's not a one-to-one skin. It's not it's Half-Blood Prince, but as a detective novel, she's, combining and, separating and doing all this kind of stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose I did feel that Draco went off into other characters as well. So that sort of sense that fandom has always had, of course, being very, very soft on Draco. And I felt he reminded me, that sense of Draco getting pulled into something that he's not heart and soul into, and it's changed, and he's, forced into something he wouldn't be. And that reminded me of both Wally, who obviously is kind of completely ghastly, but he's not actually, he's getting pulled in by the Harvening. They want something more from him. And Morehouse as well. So Morehouse has started something off with Enemy. It shouldn't be disastrous, but he's getting pulled in too deep. Enemy is changing what was just something fun into something that might involve murdering people. So obviously Morehouse is a good guy completely. He's like a good version of Draco. There's nothing wrong with him, but there is that question of why he doesn't reveal who Enemy. I think he should have gone to the police a long time before he thought about it.
Yes,
and he didn't have a close. The only reason he would not is if he had a really close relationship with Gus that made him unable to believe that this person was a murderer. And I don't feel we ever felt that was justified. So yeah, Morehouse should have a long time beforehand should have gone. I have my concerns about Gus. I'd like you to look into him without him knowing who I am, and that would have been a very sensible, safe behaviour. So it's that sense of Draco playing with something genuinely evil without really realising what it's getting him into, I felt paralleled.
Yeah, I love that. I love Draco tying into Wally Cardew. I never put that together. But yeah, they are sort of both being recruited by, the Nazi organization. And
that's one of the closest parallels is that Death Eater Harvening Brotherhood of Ultimate link, because they are branded with a sign. So that's sort of the way in which they wear the runes and having the dark mark seemed a very close parallel between those two. And of course, the sense in which the Death Eaters are, a symbolic parallel for Nazism is clearly present in Potter, and then is made into this literal sense with the Harvening. So I felt, that felt like a very close parallel. So Draco and Wally being sort of people on the edges of it.
Yeah.
The Harvening is also an enabler of Enemy.
Yeah.
So the Harvening is the group that create the opportunity. They point Enemy in the direction of the disguises and tasers, and I wonder how much how dark Anime would have got without that influence. I mean, he's obviously in a very bad place.
Yeah, I didn't feel that. So for me, they enable him, but he's going to be a murderer without them. They simply give him the means, but he could have done it another way.
Yeah. I agree, because, he's pretty much the same age as Tom Riddle, and they have pretty much the same body count at this point. So I don't think there's a lot of scenarios where Gus turns out okay.
No. And I felt, that to me is a slight cheat of the novel, was that I don't think he needed to use the taser. The taser was there to link into the halvening, but also to enable us to suspect everybody. So I don't know about you, but that thing with Inigo and also Flavia, I was there going, well, this person seems terribly nice, so she must be suspicious. And so, a child or a disabled person could have killed them because of the taser, but actually Gus didn't need to use a taser. So it was it helped the plot for making everybody suspicious, and Kia as well, and it linked up, and it meant that Anime had to kill off the vile character and things. So it worked very nicely for the plot, but I just didn't think it was actually essential for Gus.
Oh, I disagree. I think it actually ties in really well, because I think for his first murder, he I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase it, but didn't want to get his hands dirty, essentially. For his first murder, he sort of wants to do a little step removed, and then sort of ramps up to, slashing people with swords. But he still
stabs them to death. The taser just enables, it makes it easier, but he doesn't kill them. He's not like a gun. He's not killing them at a remove. He is still stabbing them through the heart. So it's not, I don't know. It doesn't feel that removed to me.
Okay, fair enough.
They are at least unconscious, I guess.
Yeah.
But Josh isn't unconscious, though, is he? Because he hears him say, I'm going to take it from here.
No,
so they're just unable to move. They're not unconscious.
That's true.
It's a petrifying... what the full body bind, the thing she does to Neville at the beginning.
Yeah.
Tripicus totalis.
Exactly. Just got much better.
I think it would kind of be less realistic if, Gus went in, swinging swords and just decapitating people from the word go. I think sort of the way the violence ramps up with Gus, where, yes, you're right, he stabs them, but it's, tase and then, stabbing without people running and getting blood everywhere and all of that. So I think it makes more sense for him to ramp up the killing. Because, he, unlike Tom Riddle, he doesn't have an Avada Kedavra where, it's no muss, no fuss.
But I think using the Harvening MO of the masks is really cool for just the whole masking metaphor. So the idea of the online persona as being sort of dangerous for people, and that you're able to, act at one remove, fits very nicely with the masking. And of course, that's another Death Eater parallel, is that they wear masks.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I love the point, Nick, that you brought up, that even though they're, secret organizations, they have giant-ass tattoos announcing who they are.
Just like Death Eaters. A covert, a clandestine organization, and they're going to permanently mark who they are on their skin. There's that great line from Strike, where this is the difference of a university education. It teaches you to put your Nazi rune on your ass rather than your forehead.
Yep. No, there was a lot of that where you just lift up his sleeve. Why doesn't he just go past Draco at some point and just grab him by the sleeve and say, is that a death mark?
People have been asking why Harry isn't undressing Draco for years in every context.
Putting it like that. It was you who led that way.
Me, I am not a Drarry shipper. I was all aboard the Hermione train.
Excellent. Maybe.
Yeah, but no, I had that thought where I was like, so do the Death Eaters just never wear t-shirts
Never
Ever.
went to, it's very much not their aesthetic, absolutely. But you would be suspicious. Who are these people wearing long sleeve shirts on incredibly hot days?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's because it never, like, gets hot in the UK, at least not to that extent.
Hogwarts is in Scotland, so yeah.
So that's true.
It doesn't get painfully hot very often in Scotland, has to be said.
Because I was in London for the heat wave last July, where it was it was 40 degrees, and, like, roads and airplane runways were literally melting.
We were all dying, and you're like, this is just completely normal weather, people.
I mean, this is, like, unpleasantly hot, but in the, like, you know, hurry to an air-conditioned building type of hot, not in the, like, country shuts down.
Exactly, yeah, but we don't have air conditioning. It's one of those things. We're sort of used to not having these extremes, so we're not very good at dealing with them.
So but, I found that out when I was talking about one of the first chapters in Order of the Phoenix, where, like, there's a heat wave and they're throwing open the window to tempt a breeze, and I was like, and you're like, why aren't they putting on an air conditioner? This makes no sense to me.
But it's also true that 5 degrees above average is classed as a heat wave here, and 5 degrees below average. We have a new phrase now. It's an Arctic blast. You'll see it in the papers, and any excuse for an Arctic blast.
Yeah, I mean, I was in London when I studied abroad. There was, like, snow, and I use that with heavy air quotes. There was, like, an inch of slush on the ground, and life ground to a halt.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Like, rain, you know, 365 days a year, like,
we have to be able to deal with rain, because that is
snow,
nothing else.
Nope. Total meltdown.
All the schools shut. Yeah.
So actually, let's dive into all the Draco parallels then. Obviously, as you were saying, like, the biggest thing is that the detective, like, guesses who it is at the very beginning. And, like, Strike even, like, lampshades it a bit at the end. He's like, next time when I say it's them, let's just actually go with that theory.
Yeah. Do you know Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid? Have you seen that film?
No.
Yeah, one of the greatest films ever. You
must see it. Yeah.
You must see it. It's absolutely the best. But anyway, there's just a bit where he says, you know, let's go someplace like Bolivia. And at the end, he says, no, next time I say that, let's definitely go someplace like Bolivia. So I thought there was a slight reference to it there, possibly. But absolutely. And I was looking out for Strike getting it right. But I didn't. Yeah, but I still didn't quite.
No. So my problem, what completely threw me off, is I was 200% convinced that Morehouse was Inigo, like because
okay. Yeah,
like the focus on disability and all of that, and his relationship with Kia, I thought was Morehouse and Paperwhite. So I spent the entire book 100 being like, this is the thing I have figured out. Morehouse is Inigo. Yeah. And so based on Morehouse's relationship with Anime and considering they know who it is, I was like, well, it can't be Gus and his father. Like, so I completely ruled Gus out. And then
that would have worked quite well from why doesn't Morehouse go to the police though? Because doesn't shop his son.
Sure, yeah, but like the way Anime treats Morehouse, I mean,
I didn't think I liked Morehouse from day one. I really liked him. Whereas Inigo was absolutely appalling. Also, so I never thought they were the same person.
Yeah, no, that just completely skewed all of my theories and analysis reading the book.
It does happen, doesn't it? Yeah, I had that with Troubled Blood. The doctor they first interview, I've forgotten his name now, who's just a really subsidiary character.
Gupta?
Yes, Dr. Gupta, that's right. And he had a Fairy Queen epigraph that was an epigraph very similar to something that's said about the big bad in Fairy Queen. So I was like, oh, it's Dr. Gupta. So I was there busy thinking, why have we never seen him again? It's him. And then you can get completely waylaid by one's theories.
Yeah. I think in Troubled Blood, I suspected the Oaktons.
Right.
Yeah, but
they were a nasty pair. Yeah, they
really were.
It was well touched. Just back to Draco. So something I liked about the surveillance, so parallel is the surveillance on Draco of Harry watching him Marauder's map and then him disappearing, and that happening with the Twitter in the game, them sort of trying to basically being in the game was like watching Marauder's map all the time. And then
God, yes.
And then he gets away from them by, putting someone else in as himself. So just like when Draco goes into the room of requirement and they can't see him on the map anymore. It's kind of like that. So yeah, I thought that was a cool parallel.
Yeah. So who in the agency is Dobby and Creature, surveilling him 24/7?
Well, Robin she plays the game way more than anyone. There's never sort of sense that maybe they should, yeah. I love the line Strike says, we should be paying you the opposite of danger money for having to be in this game all the time. It's like boredom money.
Yeah, I loved the Draco enemy parallel of seeing them cornered and how they sort of become more dangerous and lash out. Because, Voldemort, we never quite see him, lose his cool. Like, the only time is when he finds out that the trio broke into Gringotts in Deathly Hallows, and he, has a bit of a tantrum, kills a few goblins.
Yeah.
But other than that, he always, keeps it together, whereas here, you see, the walls closing in on Draco and Enemy, and, sort of how they become trigger-happy. When Harry sees Draco crying to Moaning Myrtle, Draco sees him and he immediately starts throwing blasting curses at him, and it's okay. And Gus, sort of his version of blasting magic is just banning people anytime they put a toe out of line. He's like, "You're banned, you're banned, you're banned."
Yeah. And of course, just stabbing everybody in his family at some nobody.
Well, and that, yes,
cool at the end. But yeah, and I feel like also that moment with Draco and Moaning Myrtle is sort of a little bit of that when Enemy speaks to Robin when he's drunk, and tells that sort of I killed someone and I didn't even feel any, and then I think he thinks he's speaking to Morehouse after that. It's not completely clear, but he's very open with her. And it's like you just sort of see this other side of him.
That's good.
I had missed that. That is an excellent pick because I was a little bit sad that we didn't really see that crisis that we see Draco in. The point where he could be helped potentially. Yeah, we don't see that, but you're absolutely right. That was that point, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was the closest we get. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, actually, I don't. I think the point where we see Draco on the verge of being helped is actually Rachel, not Enemy.
Right. So it's a different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. The regret that she shows, where she's like, I just wish I hadn't ever gotten involved with Enemy. The whole passage where it's her and Robin is being it's okay, it'll be okay, we'll take care of you, we'll protect you. It just completely took me back to the Lightning Struck Tower.
Yeah, but I think that's that bit rather than the Myrtle vulnerability.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes.
But you're right, obviously the Lightning Struck Tower is when Draco might actually change his mind, but he has the vulnerability before.
Well, and yeah, so sort of if Enemy is the big bad side of Draco, Rachel is sort of the scared teenager out of her depth parallel here.
Yeah, that's right, a different side of it. Just in terms of another, this one is not quite Draco, but a sort of related one of the Death Eaters and the Halvening. I thought the fact there's a stupid Halvening member who's going, so Valpashora, Oliver Peach is just an idiot who likes to boast and is, just a complete disaster. And you could see Lord Trek just saying, "Shut up!" and delete your Twitter and all this. And I felt that was Draco trying to keep control. And Crabbe and Goyle are just complete idiots, and he's like, "Can you just stop that?" And they were like, "Well, you don't have to do what you say." And then and then it kills, Goyle, isn't it? He does the fiend fire and he gets killed, and so that that
Crabbe,
does have,
actually.
Crabbe, sorry, I find them very difficult.
Goyle in the movies because Crabbe was in jail for growing drugs.
Oh my goodness!
But Crabbe in the books.
I love that as a reason for the change. Yes, that's brilliant.
No, the actor.
Yes, I realize they didn't change the plot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Fun side quest in Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Yeah, that wasn't a movie mistake. I just can't tell them apart.
That's fair.
One of them starts the fiend fire and then is killed, and I feel like that Valpashora it's his fault that Enemy decides to murder him, in the sense that he doesn't need to push him like that and make it clear that they know and everything. So that's sort of, and again the hero tries to say, no, obviously Harry doesn't manage to save Crabbe, but Robin does manage to save Valpashura. So there is a sort of sense of the, the extreme heroism of our hero, that they will put their life in danger for even someone as sort of ghastly as Crabstroke. Oliver Pashura.
Yeah. They were talking about that on the Strike and Ellicott files on the latest episode, on like how dumb Oliver Peach is and like how immensely frustrating it must be to be his brother.
I know. I like that though. I like that Lord Drake has a bad time because he is obviously a completely ghastly guy. So it's like
right. Okay. But it's also like I feel bad like relating to Lord Drek in any way, shape, or form. But that's like I'm surrounded by idiots.
I know, and that's the same with Anime. I think, we also relate with Anime. When Anime gets to just sort of, ban Lord Drek after having, almost murdered his brother. Yeah. We're on Anime's side. Obviously, we don't approve of him having murdered someone, but we're sort of like, yes, to have power over this neo-Nazi is very satisfying. It's like, yes, banned. And, so it's very clever to have us, because you've got two different big bads going on in this. When one gets one over the other, is sort of satisfying as the reader, even if we're never on Anime's side full on.
Well, the interesting thing about this sort of like, having really dumb minions thing is I feel like that's actually like, it's a commonality between Draco and Anime where they sort of seek out like minions that, aren't too smart. Like, Anime, I think, has a great line about one of the new mods he brings into the game, where he's like, they're smart enough not to get too smart. And I feel like that's also sort of what Draco is looking for in his henchmen. Yes.
And there's a very, so I'm quite interested in some of the Christological parallels in Harry Potter, and there's a very striking one there where, Draco wants people who are beneath him, and Harry has that little thing where he says to him, my friends know what I'm doing. This sort of sense where you're not telling them what you're doing, you're just using them as minions. And there's a bit in the Gospels where Christ says, these, and no longer do I call you disciples, but friends. And this sort of sense that it's part of the sort of what's good about Harry is that his friends become his equals. He's not just sort of the lone person. And one of the things I really love about Harry Potter is the fact that each of them, a different person kills each Horcrux. That there's a sort of, you're not the sole, he is the hero, but the others all have a really important role to play, whereas Draco is just, you do what I say, and Anime's exactly that. He's just not interested in having anyone with him, and that's obviously like Voldemort, that sense of just, you're not really interested in other people, you can't do friendship, and neither of them can do friendship.
Yeah, there was a fantastic essay on LiveJournal a million years ago by Sophie Rom talking about how Order of the Phoenix is essentially a meditation on like leaders and groups, and how it shows how preferable it is to have a group of equals sort of led by an equal rather than sort of relationships like Voldemort and the Death Eaters, or even Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix, where just like there's a leader who's like so far above the others in, intelligence and capability and power, and sort of how Dumbledore's army presents such a positive parallel to those.
And it's a round table idea as well, isn't it? So we know Arthur is in the head, but the idea that the knights should be equal is present in that round table.
Yeah, I think the essay was called Dumbledore's Decisions and the Vulnerability of Authority. I'm gonna drop it in our recommended reading as well. So listeners, Sophia has joined us. Yay!
Hi!
Hi, Sophia.
Back to Draco. I actually think there's a lot of parallels we can find in his victims. So both Draco and Anime sort of have two murders or murder attempts on the way to like the big bloody climax of the series. So Draco makes half-assed attempts to kill Dumbledore with the necklace that gets to Katie and the poison mead that gets to Ron. Gus nearly kills Oliver Peach and actually kills Vicus, R.I.P.
Yes. That one was very sad, wasn't it?
It was.
I did feel that generally with Ink Black Heart, there was, as I've sort of said, I think the Anime slightly gets into the plot and we are a bit too separated. I felt it never felt really, I didn't feel we felt warmth for Edie in the way that I wanted us to. But yeah, but with Morehouse, it was really, really sad.
Well, and it was so cinematic almost. Like, Joe doesn't do a lot of the like, and at that very moment, someone burst through the door. Yeah. But there where, like, he's literally typing and there's someone at the door and you're like, no.
And I had worked out that Paper White was Anime by that point. So I was like, no, because I sort of thought, you think you're safe because you're talking to, no, I know they're just on an iPad outside your door typing to you. I was like, no.
Oh, whereas I thought it was like a tragic romance where he like had told the girl that he was finally going to come clean and it's all looking up and then he dies.
Oh, for me, the Paperwhite reveal hit me like a brick. I did not see that coming at all.
No, I thought that was really clever. And I sort of got it because I realized that must be what the three parallel texts was about, was you had to work out who enemy could be from who was typing at the same time. And it was awful because, again, that was another tragedy. It's like Morehouse was so into her, and how, that was whole thing was a sham was just a terrible, terrible thing as well. So, it was very sad.
Yeah, and actually that's a commonality between the second victims, right? Because, like, the second victim is madly in love with someone, but those affections come with false pretenses. Ron was, madly in love with Romilda Vane and her love potions when he was attacked. And, poor Morehouse was in love with the fake Paperwhite.
That's smart. It's a nice link. I like the sort of love potion. And again, it fits with the way that magic, so polyjuice potion generally, but the love potions works as well, fits with online anonymity in this. So this is that the real world version is that you can be a fake person online. And again, just as in Half-Blood Prince, it's the bad guys who use polyjuice potion in this. So it was the good guys who use it in Chamber, but in this one, it's the bad guys who use it. So we've obviously the good guys are using it again. We have Robin pretending to be someone else again, but it's mainly Anime who's using this as disguise. It's Paperwhite is the main polyjuiced character.
Yeah.
So that's another nice link. And I like the love potion one as well.
And then for the first victims, Katie Bell and Oliver Peach, they both suffer very serious damage to their minds, from the cursed opal necklace and from the, concussion that Oliver got. And they're both also attacked, like, in plain view of the detectives. Like, Strike and Harry, Ron, and Hermione are, like, right there when they witness the attack happen.
Yeah.
And then I have just one more parallel with Draco and Gus, but that I really, really liked, where, talk of using magic and all that. They both have a woman whom they control, and they make her, do various misdeeds for them while the bad guy is busy and therefore providing an alibi for them.
Yeah.
So, like, Hartella impersonates Anime in the game because she's being blackmailed over the Havening and all that. And that's sort of what throws Strike off. Just like Madame Rosmerta is imperious by Draco, and she's the one who gives Katie the opal necklace while Draco's in detention. And therefore McGonagall dismisses Harry's theory that, Draco's up to no good but he was right here. He can't have done it.
Yeah. No, it's a nice link, definitely.
Yeah.
But of course, Harry doesn't fall for it.
No, that's the irony. Harry's a better detective than Strike. Yeah.
It is weird as well, isn't it? While they're, they are being Buffy paws, they are perfectly aware of the fact you can pretend to be someone else online, but yet they completely fall for it. But there you go.
Well, I think in this case, Harry is actually helped by his own prejudice. So Strike is being more objective here and is like trying to look at all the facts and like, cross people out based on the facts. And Harry's like, I don't have facts. I just know it's Draco.
I don't care what facts.
I don't have facts. I have feelings.
And his hunch is correct. So the first time in 6 books, but his hunch is correct. So
I really noticed there was a clever one in Ink Black Heart of sending us the wrong way with the hunch, because we're very trained to believe when Strike has an intuition that it's going to be right. And in that bit where he has an intuition to follow Inigo, so he sends the detective after Inigo rather than Gus, and he doesn't know why, but he's like, I've got this intuition that this is the right thing to do. And you're like, the intuition is absolutely taking us away from Anime, and we fall for it because we're like, we believe in our detective's hunches. But I think it's clever because it's not a cheat, he can have a wrong hunch. But yes. But we do naturally fall for it.
So that's Draco and Anime. But as we said at the beginning, Anime is many characters all at once, kind of like Draco is. So I think let's move on to Enemy and Severus Snape. Because they are both the killer of our story. And, of course, the most obvious parallel is that they are the man behind, like, the pseudonym that we're trying to uncover. Snape is the titular Half-Blood Prince, Gus is Enemy.
And this also works with the text within the text, which is the thing I particularly love about the parallel. So Snape improves the text within the text. So, there's the original Libratius Borage text, which Snape has improved. And most people clearly think that the game is kind of an improvement on Ink Black Heart, was certainly a sort of fun extra layer. So that's a really nice connection between them.
I loved that. Like, when I read that in your essay, I was like, oh my God, yes. And actually, just going back to their pseudonyms for a minute, that's actually a commonality they also have with Voldemort. Harry points this out at the end of Half-Blood Prince, how Snape and Voldemort gave themselves an impressive new name, Lord Voldemort, the Half-Blood Prince, and same with Gus. So in that way, he sort of matches up to both of them.
Don't you think that's incredibly self-aware of Gus to choose that as a pseudonym?
Yes, but I think that's also part of the internet culture. Basically, Gus is part of, that community online of, 4chan and whatever, where, being transgressive against social norms was very much the thing to be doing, sort of the anti-Tumblr. And so, yeah, I think it's self-aware, but it's also very much of the moment, of that internet culture that he would have been a part of. And
I suppose that's it's a weird self-reveal that, there's sort of sense that the internet's like this generally, but in here as well, that people are willing to be open about things they wouldn't necessarily be open with. I remember a great line from Ben Elton once when he was doing a stand-up when he was talking about something incredibly intimate about his body, and people were like, you're happy to say that? And said, of course, no, I'd never tell anyone that normally, but I'm very happy to tell a million strangers, obviously,
Right, exactly.
And I think we see that with Snape, too. His pseudonym is also strangely revealing. The fact that he admits that he's half-blood in a space where most of his friends and his sort of little inner circle doesn't want to admit that. But in this book, he's allowed to sort of have this nickname that's a little bit transgressive even within his sort of Death Eater social circle.
Yeah, and I think that's the case with Prince as well, isn't it? It's not actually as grand. So Lord Voldemort's definitely taking Lord, but Prince is linking into his parents rather than being quite the name that we think it is.
Yeah. And I also think it goes back to, Gus probably thinks most people don't know what Enemy is, so it allows him to, feel clever, being like, yes, my name is this reference that none of you will understand.
Yeah, and I think he's right in thinking that. I don't know about you, but I definitely had to look Enemy up,
No, I had no idea.
And I think lots of people still think it means anonymous, that it's sort of, it is a play on that, but it's, yeah. It also strikes me, because of the place he's got it from Stained Glass Window in North Grove, and that is about the opposite of Enemy. So the quote is about how to avoid enemy by connections with other people, and the image is this beautiful Edenic image that Mariam has created of all her friends living in a pastoral landscape. The idea that Enemy should see that and sort of take the opposite of it and to invert it. And so it's a sort of jealousy of people who are connected that he's chosen the name from.
Yeah. And I think if we're going with the Enemy and Snape parallel, right, then we can also talk about their gross relationship with women, for lack of a better descriptor.
There's that odd thing, isn't there, in one of Gus's Twitter personas, it says he is sort of angrily and, he's very open about being a virgin. So it's sort of that sort of sense of attacking women, but not being, so he hates being a virgin, but neither is he willing to put in any effort to be appealing to women. He's doing it, he wants to lose his virginity by being aggressive. He's like, well, there's a much simpler way of doing this. But, that sort of, it's interesting that he doesn't mind being out about that at all. And yeah.
Well, because the whole shtick with the incel community is that, like, it's not their fault they're virgins. Like, it's a victim thing.
But it is a very, odd mindset. You think if you care about this, then, yeah, there's a... well, as I say, there's a better way of getting round it than being horrible to women.
Well, and I would argue that both Snape and Gus die virgins. Because I always assumed Snape never did get it on.
Yeah, but I don't think... So I think a big difference is that, Snape... It doesn't change into hatred for Snape. So, yeah, he never changed... the embitteredness that happens to Gus as a result of his sort of lack of success with women, we don't see that with Snape. And he had a proper friendship with Lily before. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But afterwards, wouldn't you class him as embittered?
Well, yeah, but not specifically against women.
Yeah, I agree.
No, he's horrible to everyone.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Which I think is a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. He's a misanthropist, not a misogynist, and that is an important difference. But Snape is particularly horrible to children. And so that's a sort of power aspect.
I think he's horrible to anyone he's able to be horrible to. Because, whenever we see him interacting with adults where he has more power over them, he will also be horrible to them. Think of how he treats Tonks at the beginning of Half-Blood Prince, for example.
But that's specific. He hates Lupin. So he hates the Marauders, and Tonks is in love with Lupin. So that's why he's horrible to her.
Well, I think he's horrible to her because he sees himself in her, where, she's made weak by love for someone and her Patronus changes and everything, and it just hits too close to home for him.
But that's very specific. It's not just a random other adult.
Right. I think that he has more respect for, the other teachers at Hogwarts. I think we see him, he's not exactly pleasant to be around, but he isn't being rude to them constantly, so...
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a big difference is with Gus, we see anytime he feels rejected by a woman at all, he completely lashes out at them and makes them into the enemy, even with Edie. And with Snape, we see it differently. He's rejected by Lily and, he's clearly very bitter about it in his own way, but when she dies, it's not like he's like, oh, good riddance because she rejected me.
No, that's right. Exactly. He's rejected and he carries on being in love with her because he's in love with her whereas all Gus is doing is hoping to get sex out of these people. And when they don't give it to him, he turns on them. And there's a very nasty one with Kia where he's just needling her, hoping she'll have sex with him. And the moment she goes not interested, he just starts abusing her online. And
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Sophia definitely changed my mind on this topic because I, used to go with the internet shorthand of Snape's an incel because, well, he's gross regarding women. But yeah, Sophia and I talked about it and you made me come around that he's not really an incel, he's just horrible in, his own
misanthropist. He is a bit of a misanthropist, but it's not an incel.
Well, I'm thinking more his whole relationship to Lily, where he has no respect for boundaries, where she clearly said no and he clearly did not receive the message, and also both he and Gus join, a Nazi-ish group that hates the type of people who spurned them in love. So Snape is in the conversation about incels, but he's not an incel.
It's difficult, but I just don't think I think the dark arts, he finds something inherently attractive about the magic, so the power of that magic. It's not about hating muggles. It's just that the muggle hating comes in with the ideology, so he kind of goes along with it for a bit. And then he realizes he shouldn't have done. Whereas, Gus is just hates other people.
I mean, I would argue the same. Gus's connection to the Havening, Gus doesn't care about, the neo-Nazi crap. He's just sort of I'm horrible and hate these people. You're horrible and hate those people. So, can I get a taser? But I
don't think he's in with the Havening. I think that happens. No. Yeah, they're used to him. But actually, he doesn't like having anyone with another kind of power around him. He just wants to be absolute top dog. He's much more Voldemort than he is Snape in sense of... he's not attracted by the power. He just uses other people to help him get his own end.
Could we draw a parallel between the dark arts and these awful pickup artist routines? Because they're almost incantational, aren't they? You say
this one
these
again.
words.
Yeah. So I like that a lot. Yeah. And if you see this particular line, then you know you've got a dark arts practitioner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just need to teach people defense against them.
Yes, absolutely. That's why you need a sort of, it's called block, I think. That's the Expelliarmus.
I know. There were so many cases when I was reading this Twitter stuff, and I was like, why on earth didn't, A block B, 5 years ago? It just...
I think some of this, but some of it, it's like some of the stuff with Twitter, it works quite well in the fact of situating in its own time. That it's all new and people haven't kind of just worked out the moment someone says something grim to you, just block them and that's the end of that. So like the fact that it's not easy for Anime to schedule tweets. And I think a number of people thought that's just a mistake, but it turns out that in the year it was set, it wasn't terribly easy to schedule tweets. That fits quite well, probably if someone's tweeting they are online. So I think that works quite nicely with the sort of an earlier internet culture where just the sort of what you do with trolls has not become second nature at that moment.
That makes sense.
A nice Snape parallel as well is another really close link between the two novels is Hermione saying evil's a strong word, which Strike says basically word for word when Kia is talking about Josh not being able to reckon. So she thinks Pez is Anime, and she says Josh can't recognize evil, and Strike says evil's a strong word. And I really like that link because you immediately get it's sort of the author laughing at Kia a bit about being an empath because immediately after she says, there's another bloke hanging around the North Grove who completely agreed with me about this. And it's like, that's the evil person you really failed to spot. So they are. And we just had the interview with Tim Ashcroft just before that when she wants to use a noise for the recording and he just goes into Iago's speech. And I really like that because Iago is kind of like the purest evil character in literature, really. So there's a famous phrase Coleridge has for him, which is motiveless malignancy. And I think that's the closest we have to Anime of just someone who's just evil for the sake of it. There's not... Iago gives lots of reasons why he hates Othello, but they're specious. Basically he just hates Othello because he hates people. That's how he is. So I thought, evil is a strong word. I was like, yes, Iago's evil. And then Tim Ashcroft then talks about how there was a guy hanging around North Grove who he echoed for a character he was playing, a teenager and he says he was pure evil, the character, Lionel. And that was great that he modelled him on Gus. I was like, yes, that's so clever that all sort of comes round together. Because I thought, what's Iago doing here? Is she telling us Tim Ashcroft is evil? And of course, she is, exactly. She is telling us that, but he's a sort of, as it were, separate evil. He's not the evil we're looking for. So it's very clever use of Iago there, I thought.
Well, and there's also the sort of abusive home commonality for Snape and Anime, right? Because you sort of have the father being abusive with Inigo and with Tobias Snape. But the curious thing is that even though the dad is abusive, he's sort of at a disadvantage power-wise compared to the rest of the family. Because, Inigo has his disability, he's in a wheelchair, and Tobias is the muggle in a family of wizards and witches, and yet they are still the abuser, which I thought was interesting.
And I also think, again, if we're just looking for good in Snape, the fact he takes his mother's name in Half-Blood Prince could be considered as a sort of siding with her in that abusive relationship between the parents. Obviously, we know he would have sided with her because she's the magic one, but I just thought I quite like that as a little side. I think that's absolutely right, and I think abuse against women is a sort of as an idea for why evil is created is something that's very common in Rowling stories all the way through. And it's very subtle in Potter. It's not, we don't see that much of it, but yeah, the Tobias one is important. But I think it comes out obviously more and more in Strike as we get into more real world scenarios.
Right. And I think that I mean, we see with Snape that he has Lily as someone who he can talk to about that. We see that a little bit in his memories. So he has that support from Lily, and I think that's really important. I think that's part of where that love comes from of Snape's, is that Lily is the one person who he can go to and who will listen to him about this and who will support him. And we see that Gus really doesn't have that person. And I think that that's a big difference that we see in those formative years, is like having that person who will support you versus not. And having it be a woman as well, I think, that helps.
But counterpoint, Gus does kind of have that at the Club Penguin thing. With, it was Rachel, right?
That's true.
Yeah, with Rachel, that's right. And then he abuses it later.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was an early side. Yeah, and I feel also, I feel terribly sorry for Flavia in this relationship. Gus is this bit older. We don't know how long ago it's been like this. Maybe he didn't grow up with this bad a dynamic. But Flavia really has, all the other members of her family was either absolutely ghastly or, her mother's not ghastly, but she's being oppressed by,
Yeah.
So Flavia really does feel very powerless. And again, I think that's meant to be one of the reasons she doesn't do more. Again, she's one of those characters I like, if she's got enough nous to ring them up with a voice changer and say, dig up Edie, then maybe she could have said a little bit more to them when she was alone with them outside the house, Again, a slightly frustrating one, but yeah.
Yeah, but it kind of makes sense, because I think what she's noticed in adults is either that they're sort of powerless like her mother to help her, or they're terrible like her father. So she might not trust Strike and Robin. She might think they'd put her in even more danger. So it kind of makes sense that she would have that fear of saying too much.
Yeah. It does, but you could do it anonymously because she knows how to make an anonymous call.
So
instead of saying,
true.
Dig up Edie, she could say something a little bit more helpful.
That's fair.
Talk of Snape. The Snape Anime parallel is, fairly on the page. But Nick, you had another parallel for Snape that has raised a few eyebrows.
I think that this theory is going to get a lot of popular support. So this is my attempt to pitch it. So Charlotte doesn't fit as a baddie. So the Psycho X is such a poor trope. When I first saw it in Cuckoo's Calling, I thought that it was an obvious swerve to stop trying to identify the author as being female. Because it is so common that a man will invent this Psycho X to excuse any previous poor behavior in a prior relationship, and to silence that voice as well. So don't talk to my ex, she's crazy. And Strike actually uses it in Ink Black Heart as well to Madeline, is stop listening to Charlotte. And the first point I think in Ink Black Heart where the Psycho X is used is with Ormond, and that for me at least was a red flag immediately. I had an ex like that. She's psycho, she's crazy. Oh, hang on, this guy's trying to hide something from a previous relationship. So I find it difficult to believe that Rowling will keep this trope of this mentally unhinged ex-girlfriend going all the way through the series now. And to me, that's quite Snapey. The other Snapey thing is she is such an obvious baddie. So she enters stage to boos and hisses. You know whatever she's going to do is going to be bad. And she's going to say something and you're not going to trust her. Whereas the other potentials for a redeemable character, Rugby, never really enters the stage. So I think even if we discover in a future book a Rugby redemption, we're never going to feel quite the same way about is Snape good or bad? Ducks for cover.
So yeah, I like your reasoning, Nick, but I completely disagree. Charlotte is never going to be redeemed, but I think she'll just go. I really thought she was going to go and shovel blood. That was going to be the end. I was like, great, we've seen the last of Charlotte. No, what's she doing turning up again? But this time, I'm sure she's gone. So the sort of, so again, there's a Jane Austen parallel here. So in Mansfield Park, Edmund has this, yen for the beautiful, gorgeous, sexy, witty, all these things that Charlotte is Miss Crawford. And the moment his eyes are opened, there's a sort of bit where they have a conversation at the end, and Miss Crawford just says, "Oh, obviously, it's if they could just have kept it quiet, their affair." And for Austen, that's the moment when Edmund suddenly realized she's completely immoral. If someone's having sex outside marriage, she's a married woman, so it's completely shocking in Austen's time. You have to separate them. You can't let them live together in sin. So Edmund is suddenly, his eyes are opened, and he realizes it had been a creature of his own imagining that he'd been in love with, not Miss Crawford. And that's his moment. And I felt very strongly when Charlotte was just like, well, let's just leave the children in an abusive relationship. And like, what? This woman has no morals at all.
That's a good Snape parallel, right? Is being really shitty to children.
Yes,
so like, I get where you're going with that.
Yeah, but I think that's Rokeby. So Rokeby's only real sin is how horrible he was to Strike as a child. And he wasn't that horrible to him. It's obviously for Strike, it was very important, but it was just observing it objectively.
Like, neglectful, but not actively horrible.
And who's this little child? I don't care about him. So it's a really unpleasant, but that's very Snape level, it seemed to me. So that seems to me to fit with the, your rival argument that Rokeby has much more chance of being redeemed than Charlotte does.
Yes.
And I feel that Rokeby... So I don't think we're going to get a Snape-like redemption, but what I think we're going to get is that Rokeby knows something that Strike's hatred of him makes him unable to hear. And we've just got to get past that. And I suspect we might get past that the same way by death. So just as Snape's character could only be revealed to Harry after he'd died, and so Harry could finally listen to what he had to say, I think we might get a letter from Rokeby after he's died, which will give us the crucial information that Strike couldn't hear till now.
Yeah. I'm fairly certain that we won't have both of them redeemed, right? Like, we need a good overarching villain, so it's either Rokeby or Charlotte at this point, because no one else has really been set up unless there's, like, an epic 11th hour twist. And I feel like of the two, if you're gonna redeem one, my money's always gonna be on Rokeby.
Yeah. Well, I think that what makes Charlotte an interesting character is not the crazy X part. It's the part that Bea was talking about, where Strike has felt this connection to her, this like personal like connection due to their troubled childhoods. And he keeps on like wanting to go back, keeps on being pulled back, even though he knows that she's terrible. And I think that's the part that's the most interesting thread. And I really love that Jane Austen connection, that there's this moment where he realizes that was all sort of in his own mind, that it was all sort of, this belief is all false.
Yeah.
And I suppose, Nick, just to, as it were, the clear rolling of the crazy axle, I think, that I feel that when Strike says that to Madeline, he's not saying don't believe what she says about me. He's saying don't believe, she's lying to you about Robin. So it's not, it's not I was abusive to her, don't believe her, she's crazy. It's she lies about this thing. So it's not quite the same thing as Ormond, who obviously is covering up the fact he was abusive to his wife. So a much more dangerous version of it.
That said, Nick, we do now have you on record, so if this theory pans out, you get I told you so rights forever.
Yes, exactly. We'll wear stickers saying Nick was right.
I must admit, I'm not ordering my my Charlotte is good t-shirt yet.
Did you see, I remember sort of going around before Deathly Hallows come and seeing someone wearing these t-shirts saying "Trust Snape." Did you see those? They were right.
So that leaves us with be, as you brought this up, Enemy and Tom Riddle as the villains of our piece, right? And there's a lot they have in common because, you know, Tom Riddle is, at the end of the day, like, the villain, just like Enemy is.
And I think this lovelessness, this lack of connection, Tom Riddle never wants it. So Tom Riddle is kind of the pure version. He's the, you know, the full-on Iago. He never wanted connection. It's not that it's gone wrong. Enemy did want it, but he, you know, is a much more realistic one that he gets rebuffed. He's really bad at doing human connection, so then he thinks it's all everybody else's fault. But I think it's interesting that way in which Rule 14 is about the fact that he doesn't want anyone around him to create friendships or relationships. That's part of the, you know, sort of psychopathic nature of it. It's not just he sort of isolated himself. It's like, no one is allowed to be happy anywhere near me.
Well, just the way Enemy, like, runs the game and controls the mods just immediately called me back to Voldemort and the Death Eaters. And, like, basically everyone Tom Riddle has ever had anything to do with. Like, Dumbledore has this great line about Tom Riddle as a kid, when he's 11 and he was already using magic against other people to frighten, to punish, to control. And same with Enemy. I think the magic that Enemy wields, you know, as a parallel to Tom Riddle, is his status in the fandom. Like, the power that, you know, he's afforded by, like, being the Enemy in, like, the Drex game. And just the way he uses that to, you know, run Drex game with an iron fist just immediately calls to mind Voldemort.
It absolutely does. And in both cases, you wonder what's really in it for everybody else. You know, I never saw the appeal of being a Death Eater as, like, you get to be, you know, treated horribly by Voldemort, who might kill you or cut your hand off at any point, you know. And it's a bit like that in the game. You're like, there's a great bit where she says, you know, the bits when Enemy gets to abuse people and they're like, oh, excellent, I got abused by Enemy. I'm so chuffed. And I think there's a sort of serious point in terms of the real world that there's a glamour to Enemy. There's no glamour to Gus. So it's part of the unmasking the way in which people can seem glamorous in their power online. But it's not real, and showing us the way in which things that look sexy online, just because power has appeal, it doesn't translate.
Yeah. Well, because when Dumbledore has that great line about the forerunners of the Death Eaters and why they joined up, one of the reasons he says is, you know, the ambitious seeking some shared glory. So I feel like a lot of the people, you know, who become mods in Drek's game are just people who, you know, want to be a part of something and want, you know, that status within that niche.
But they get the same, you know, what the reality is that he's horrible to them and makes them be in mods all the time. So all of them are going, no, I have to do my job, I have to sleep. And it's like, no, you will sit here and mod for the next 24 hours. And you're like, I don't know why they're not just saying, I'm not interested in doing this anymore.
Right? Like, I don't put up with that from my job, which actually pays me. Like,
yeah, it's a very, you know, like with the Death Eaters, and you wonder, you know, obviously there's a point where they get killed if they run away. But until that, you sort of think, yeah, it's a very dangerous thing for not obvious payback. But yeah, I think I quite like that in terms of just as I say, the glamour of evil, the glamour of power, that she's trying to make it, to say this is not actually all that. It looks more fun than it is.
Yeah.
What I also find interesting is that even though, Voldemort is like the big bad of the series and of the book, he's not very present, at least in the present. He's not very present in Half-Blood Prince. We don't really meet him. And I think in this book, I mean, Gus is also not super present, which kind of surprised me at the end. I was like, oh, this is the suspect we've spent the least time on. But I think it's the interesting parallel is that we actually do spend a lot of time with both of them, just in a different format. So we spend a lot of time with Tom Riddle in these memories, and we spend a lot of time with Enemy in the game, in the chats. So it's sort of a different format that we're getting to know these characters that's almost more intimate than what we usually see of them.
Yes, I completely agree. And I also think that's that's why it's allowable as not a cheat, because
Right.
I think it would be a cheat if Gus was, in a normal novel, you'd like, well, they don't interview him, and you can't really have the murderer who never gets an interview, that almost never speaks to him. There's 2 tiny passages they say, he pops in and says, "Can I use the car?" or whatever, and goes, and you're like, that's not
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely a bit of a cheat, but because you've had so much time with Anime in the chats, and as we'd find out on Twitter as well, in all the fake Twitter things, and as Paperwhite, and so we spent a third of the novel with Anime. It's just not knowing who it is. So I think that's a really good parallel, that Riddle is an absent presence in Half-Blood Prince.
And, like, their backgrounds, the background we see for Tom Riddle and Half-Blood Prince and what we know of Anime, like, there is a lot of commonality there. Both actually try to become a part of the thing that they then set themselves in opposition to, Voldemort, like, goes for the Defense Against Dark Arts job. He, like, wants to be in Hogwarts, a part of Hogwarts, like, working with Dumbledore. And then it doesn't go well, and Gus reaches out to Josh to, like, become part of the Ink Black Heart cartoon. He's like, I have all these ideas, you should write me in as a character and all that. So they very much, like, want to be a part of it, and then when they get rebuffed, then they go on the warpath against it.
Although I would argue that neither of them wants to really be working with the other person so much. I think especially for Voldemort, this is mainly an excuse. He doesn't want to be underneath Dumbledore. Like, he's using this as an excuse to sort of be, like, impress young minds and try to get them to join his cause. And I think with Gus too, I mean, sure, he might be willing to work with Josh at first, but I think he really just wants full control. Like, that's really his ultimate goal.
Ultimate goal, yeah, but I think they both, like, genuinely want to be, like, teaching at Hogwarts and, like, be a part of the cartoon. Like,
sure. I mean, with the Hogwarts, obviously, we don't know he does want to be. So obviously, he does ask at the beginning, but when he asked Dumbledore, that seems to be it's just cover for putting the Horcrux back in the room of requirement.
Right.
But he has a genuine affection for Hogwarts, so that
Right.
that I think really clever, uneasy connection between Harry and Voldemort of they both really love Hogwarts, and this was their first real home. So they do both have an appeal. They're pulled towards something, and then, yeah, as you say, then are incredibly destructive when they're rebuffed.
Yeah.
And I think for both of them, if they actually achieved the ambition that they wanted, they would have had the same effect. So if Anime was to control the Ink Black Heart, it would not be the Ink Black Heart. If Riddle had become a power within Hogwarts, it would not be the Hogwarts that we all think of.
That's a good point.
And there's a lovely comment, I can't remember who makes it now, whether it's Strike or something, what's Edie done? She's just created something you're meant to love. Why? What's her big crime? And I guess the same, they have this sort of thing that the sort of hatred of the creator, but also it's something they're meant to love. But then if they were to get into it, they would destroy it. So, yeah, it's not a real love.
Well, and then, both Gus and Tom Riddle, kill their fathers. That's, very trendy among villains these days.
Yeah, there's a big parasite theme, isn't there? But,
yeah, in both of Rowling's series, because, you also have the Crouches and the Chisels.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the big, yeah. And I feel the Crouch it's also they're the same name. So both of them have both killed the father who's got the same name as them. So it's like even closer. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, like, the key connection between Anime and Tom Riddle is, of course, the Horcruxes. And, the parallel to Tom Riddle's Horcruxes are, of course, Gus's multiple online identities.
Yeah. And I can't remember. That is under. It's either. I think that's in my article, because that was suggested by a reader when we were first looking at the parallels. Because I was thinking, well, we really need Horcrux parallels in Blackheart if it's going to be this link. And yeah, I think it might have been Sandy who said, yeah, what about these? And of course, they're really tiny compared to the Horcruxes, because he doesn't really need a Twitter persona. He needs his enemy in the game persona, but he doesn't, though of course Paperwhite kind of works for that as well. But I think, yeah, absolutely, that's a brilliant real world parallel for Horcrux, that you can stay alive online, even if you're shut down.
Yeah. You have this, like, awesome turn of phrase in that article that I actually put in here. I mean, if you want to.
No, you go for it.
Yeah. Where these accounts appear independent from their host, but are animated by the same soul. And I was like, that just, chef's kiss. And on a, more fun note, Tom Riddle and Enemy both have a vampire aesthetic going on, according to your essay.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that, again, it sort of comes out in, this is a nice Half-Blood Prince parallel, that the vampire becomes clearer in Half-Blood Prince, because this is when the hunting down the Horcruxes begins, which was one of the main Dracula parallels of Voldemort, is that he has these little, 30 caskets of earth or whatever they are. They have to destroy everyone before they can get to the big guy. So when you get that hunting down the Horcruxes, which is explained in Half-Blood Prince, that's the big Dracula parallel. So the fact that then that is, this vampire connection in Ink Black Heart. Yeah, I was really pleased. I'd already thought about this vampire connection, then got to the bit where one of them says, what's he doing out after midnight? Is he a vampire or something? I was like, yes!
So yeah, I guess that's Enemy, sort of every, bit and aspect of him. So let's get into some of the other villains we have in this series. So I don't know how you pronounce this last name, the Dejongs?
Yeah, I don't either. No, just go with that.
Yeah. But the guys who run the collective, Nils and his son Bram. And I'll admit, my first instinct was like, are they the Malfoys? Is Bram like a really tortured Draco? And no, not anywhere close. The Dejongs are the Gaunts in Half-Blood Prince. Nils is Marvolo Gaunt, where just like he indulges all of his son's most antisocial impulses. Like, oh my god, the scene in the bar where Bram is just being an absolute menace and Nils is doing nothing. I was like, oh my god.
Excellent, yeah. The poor couple, they're like, please don't attack our dog. It's a nice vampire connection. So, Abraham Helsing is named after the author Bram Stoker, and Bram is a shortening. When I said this, people said, "Oh no, it's quite common," but it's not. No. It's not wildly common. It's uncommon enough that when you meet a character called Bram, you do immediately think Dracula. So he's a nice little just sort of name check there.
Yeah. So if Bram is our Morphin parallel, right, where he's just like the seriously messed up son of this seriously messed up family, you talk about Bram as a truly gothic creation. So like, do you think that applies to Morphin Gaunt as well?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I have to say, this sort of, absolutely terrible backstory. So Bram has the nastiest backstory of any character Rowling's ever written, I think. And that reminded me of Voldemort. It reminded me of Snape, that sort of sense of this sort of, absolutely terrible childhood translates into someone who is disturbed. So there is that. And Morphin, it's not the same as that. So Morphin is like almost like a extreme Dudley, isn't he? If someone like his father just lets him do exactly what he likes, and it's not very good for him. But yeah, he is a gothic creation in another sense of this sort of house in the woods where nobody goes, and yeah, hammering snakes onto doors is quite extreme. So yeah, there's definitely an aspect of that.
And there's also, like, the connection that Nils and Marvolo Gaunt are both, like, a next level of racist. Like, there's racist and then there's whatever these people do, where, like, anyone who comes up to Nils and will, like, listen for more than 10 seconds, he's like, so let me talk to you about the different races of humans and why I'm the best race of human. And that just immediately reminded me Marvolo in the memory where, like, the minute Bob Ogden shows up and he's like, are you a Muggleborn?
Yeah.
And he's like, what?
Yes, that's right. I need to compartmentalize everybody I speak to into which I'm meant to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Nils is a brilliant character because he's also a hippie. So you have this sort of he's a very weird. You've got the Halvaningers like the straight Nazis, and Nils is, as you say, absolutely racist. But he's also got some sort of unexpected side, running a communist commune, basically, where anyone's free to come and make art. You think this is not quite what I expect from this kind of character. So he's, more nuanced than the number of the other characters, where it's very clear what they, where they fit.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting to think about because in Harry Potter, the Gaunts are Tom Riddle's ancestors. And I mean, in this case, of course, they're not Gus's ancestors, but there's a way in which he's like carrying on their legacy because of the anime. The word anime comes up a lot.
Anime comes from this, and the Leapine's disciple as well, which is one of his Twitter personas. He's got that from the reading in Evola, I think is there. So a number of the people he's reading, he might well have picked them up from North Grove.
Right. So it's sort of that legacy, carrying down from Nils and Bram. Yeah.
And so I like that you mentioned Morphin as a kind of extreme Dudley. So I think, Sophia, you had this good parallel of the Dursleys being the Ledwells. Yeah,
because they're both aunt and uncle to a nephew/niece who is left without really any other family at a pretty young age, and that they're put in this position of being expected to care for that niece/nephew. And I thought of this with listening to the episode of the Strike and Ellicott Files. Irvin, did you actually find that episode number?
I did. Yeah, it was season 3 of the Strike and Ellicott Files, episode 7.
Season 3,
which,
episode
listeners,
7.
If you're not familiar, it's a Cormoran Strike podcast that is so good. It is a pure joy to listen to.
Yes.
Go listen to the Strike and Ellicott Files.
Yeah. So in that episode, they were talking about sort of when they're first meeting the Ledwells at lunch, and they discussed really some of the reasons that Grant talks about why he did not take Edie in. And they were showing a lot of sympathy towards the Ledwells and really arguing the fact that no one should be forced to take care of a child if they don't want to. And that really made me think of the Dursleys. It gave me a little bit more sympathy for the Dursleys too, because they are really quite forced to take care of Harry. He's literally dumped on their doorstep. We don't know exactly what the letter said, but something along the lines of, he will be killed by a dark wizard if you don't do this. So really, they're really manipulated into this situation, and they clearly resent it so much. And I'm not at all excusing either the Ledwells or the Dursleys for their treatment of their niece and nephew. There's, for both of them, a lot of wrongdoing there and a lot of abuse. But I think just essentially the idea that it's not necessarily right to expect someone to take in a child if they don't feel ready for that, or if that's not something that they want. So it gave me a little bit of sympathy for the Dursleys, but also there's just a lot of negative parallels between the two. They both just clearly don't care about their niece or nephew at all. Don't really care if they die or that Edie's dead. Also just their greediness. I think we see this in Half-Blood Prince, where we can see how Uncle Vernon is clearly responding to the
oh yeah, he's been left a house.
Yeah. And I think there's a really great line where Harry is like, he never told the Dursleys about his money in Gringotts because he didn't think that their fear of anything magical would extend to a large pile of gold. So basically, yeah, this greediness that they're not willing to give him anything, but want to, take as much as possible from him. And we really see that with the Ledwells, where they didn't really care about Edie at all, but they are more than happy to cash out on her creation. Yeah, and also there's an interesting Rachel Dudley parallel. Not that I think they're that similar, but in Dudley's case, he was bullying Harry from a young age, and then kind of changes his mind about it. With Rachel's case, it's more that she's just part of this group that is bullying Edie and kind of starts to realize that this is not the right place for her, because she doesn't want to be bullying Edie. So I think there's that kind of interesting comparison between them.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that Rachel can sort of serve as a parallel to both Dudley and Draco, like we discussed earlier, because, I mean, the two serve as a mirror to each other in a lot of ways. Yeah, like, I just remembered, it's in Half-Blood Prince, right, that we get Dumbledore's line about the appalling damage the Dursleys did to Dudley. Mm-hmm. And I think you can definitely extrapolate that to the Ledwells and Rachel. Like, even though, you know, they raised Rachel, whereas they did not raise Edie, like, Rachel clearly does not have a good home life, you know, just based on how she's acting out against her dad.
She has a good Twitter handle, which is Rachel Led Badly.
Yes.
Just a pun, but I thought it's a nice one, and, you know, her parents have led her astray a bit.
And, like, to your point about, you know, not being forced to take in kids, I feel like I will never have sympathy for the Dursleys on this point, because, like, well, if you did take in the kid, whether, like, you wanted to or not, like, you don't need to be such.
I'm not at all, you know, I'm not trying to say that their treatment of Harry is justified or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's more that I can understand why they would feel some anger and resentment, at least towards Dumbledore, of putting them in this position of having to take care of another kid when they don't necessarily want to. Maybe they just wanted one kid, that was their plan, and suddenly this kid of their estranged sister is pushed on them. You know, like, I feel some sympathy for that position that they were put in. I think that they handled it terribly.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So I think, we can all feel this is not quite fair, but she did, you know, it says Petunia did take him in. And I feel like it's one of those things where reading it as a child, you just expect your hero to be abused. It feels very natural that he's lives in the understairs cupboard, and this is something, you know, as a child's fun. As an adult reading that, I just find it unreadable. They're absolutely abusers, and they should be in prison, you know, like they don't feed him properly and all this stuff. So it's like, it's fine when you're the child hero, but when you're the adult, you're like, what's going on? Why is no one reporting to them, to the social services?
Yeah, we talked a lot about that on the last episode about like, you know, where is Child Protective Services here?
Seriously.
Exactly. But it's fine. I feel it is a fairy tale, you know, that they are fairy tale. They are very well doll characters, those two.
Yes.
And so you accept them at that level.
And they become a little bit more three-dimensional over time, just more interesting, I think, over time. And I think that fits with the reader's developmental stage. That, in the first book, they're very much just sort of caricatures, fairy tale. And then over time, we kind of see some of the complicated...
Sort of, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker sort of versions in the first. No, and I really like the fact we get that Petunia's jealous in the final one. You know, that's very nicely done.
Yeah. I found a cool connection between Vernon and Grant Ledwell, where they just completely mispronounce things, like, you know, Vernon's complete mispronunciation of all wizarding terms, you know, the Dementi Whatsits and so on. And Grant Ledwell's, you know, black ink heart faux pas, where he, like, you know, makes a message to the fandom and gets the name of the thing wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was very funny.
Kia's mum does that as well. Do you remember? She's always saying, "What is this anomaly?" Like the parents refusing to join in this game.
I feel like I have a bit more sympathy for like getting you know, a word like enemy wrong versus, you know, ink black heart.
It's true. But it is true. But it is corrected, and she's like, "I'm not having it."
And then this is a parallel. This is actually kind of what precipitated me and Sophia wanting to branch out into this topic, is Fenrir Greyback and Tim Ashcroft are very neat, like sort of a one-to-one parallel.
I think that's, it's a very good parallel of a real-world version.
Yeah.
Because I think, I mean, with Fenrir, I mean, yes, he's sort of attacking many people, but he seems to have a particular interest in young girls, and especially children. We learn that he likes to bite children, but he seems to have a particular interest in biting young girls or teenage girls. So yeah, that parallel is pretty clear.
Can I ask for citation on that?
Well, Hermione, the way he acts with Hermione is pretty creepy, and it feels very sexualized.
Well, so I think it's I think it's two separate things, right? I think he likes attacking children and turning them into werewolves, and he's also like rapey and gross and horrible towards like, you know, more grown-up girls. You know, by the time he gets to Hermione and Ginny, they are like 17-ish.
Yes.
So
okay. I mean, sure. I think maybe there are two different motivations there. I mean, the children is more like strategic, but he clearly has a sort of the biting is clearly it has a sexual connotation. Like there is this interest in younger or teenage girls. So Lavender Brown, Hermione, all of that.
And I suppose the biting does fit with vampires. It's sort of, you know, well known as a sexualized imagery. I don't think that's the case with werewolves generally, but it definitely, because we've got that vampire side to it, it does fit in with that.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting as sort of contrast, but like interesting contrast, is that Tim Ashcroft, he is attacking, or I mean, yes, sort of trying to get these young girls, these teenage girls, but he's trying to make everyone think that he's a great person. So he's like really trying to fit in with normal society while at the same time doing this horrible thing. Whereas we see that Greyback does something very different than a lot of the other werewolves in that he doesn't try to pretend at all. He doesn't try to fit in with wizarding society. He's just very intentional about sort of creating his own werewolf space where it's acceptable in that space to go and attack children. And I think that's an interesting parallel between the two of them, that sort of contrast there.
Yeah, so Fenrir has a sort of, it's a Grindelwald thing, isn't it? Of, you know, like the wizards rising up and being in charge.
Yeah,
and I think Fenrir is like, you know, where werewolves can just be open about their werewolfiness.
Yeah. So like beyond just the fact that they're both really gross, and that's the parallel, I think there's another connection. So there was an article I read ages ago that I will not Google, will not look up, and will not cite because God help my search history. But this article basically said that pedophilia is like a mental illness. Like, you know, there's something like fundamentally wrong with your mind where you are like sexually turned on by children, like that. You know, that's not something you choose or something that's just something wrong with your mind. And I feel like that makes sense to me. And from that point of view, both Fenrir Greyback and Tim Ashcroft essentially have an affliction that is deemed, you know, not okay in society, is like not something we can live with or accept. But both of them lean into it and like indulge the disease. You know, we see werewolves who like take wolfsbane potion and, you know, try not to attack people. And then there's Greyback who deliberately places himself in a position to claim victims as a werewolf. And so same with Tim Ashcroft, right? Like, you know, even if he was turned on by children, like you could, you know, try to not place yourself in positions like that or whatever. But he like very deliberately makes this blog and like seeks out underage girls on Twitter. And so both of them just sort of lean into their illness rather than fighting against it.
They're both predators.
Yes. Yeah. Ugh. Gross.
Yeah, I think in terms of all the truly chilling characters in this book, Ashcroft has to be one of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else about Fenrir and Tim, or can we leave the subject?
We can leave the subject.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Talking of people who are gross, but less so. I would say that the Peaches, Oliver, and the other one,
Charlie, right?
Lord Drek.
Lord Drek,
yes.
It's Lord Drek, that's easier, isn't it?
Yeah. I would say that they're the Caros. They are both, you know, siblings who are part of this Nazi-ish organization. We know that sort of, even by like Death Eater standards, the Caros are like virulently anti-Muggle. You know, we see Alecto Carroll, like, teaching quote-unquote Muggle studies in Deathly Hallows.
Yeah, and I think it also fits with the sort of, you know, the idea of the sort of lack of friendship inside these worlds, that the only way you can get people to sort of work together is if they're actually blood related, then they sort of have to be together, but they don't really like each other.
I mean, I never got the sense that the Carroll siblings don't like each other.
They don't really, you know, remember when he's lying on the door and saying, "You idiot, what you know," he's very abusive to her when he thinks that she's in there, when she's being petrified and he doesn't realize. It's like, if you've touched your dark mark, what's going on?
Well, he was fearing for his life.
He's very angry, but it's true, but we don't see anything positive between them.
I don't know. Like, impression I got that they maybe, you know, like each other too much. Like, you know, opposite end of the spectrum.
What? Did you have any textual basis for that?
Fan fiction does not count.
Okay, no. I can assure you I have not read Caro's fanfiction. Like, I've read a lot of fanfiction in my day. That is not what I'm touching.
Doesn't exist, yeah.
Yeah. No, I was actually talking about this with Lori Kim, where just like, it's a vibe we get from them. No, there's not good textual evidence for that, and thank God. And both the Carrows and the Peaches, you know, come from like an upper class family. You know, the Carrows are the Sacred 28, and the Peaches, you know, are the son of a billionaire who, you know, just apparently throws money at mayoral runs in London for no good reason. So yeah, I mean, both the Carrows especially are fairly minor characters in Half-Blood Prince, but I think the parallel lines up fairly neatly.
And I guess, I mean, from my perspective, although they're both coming from either rich or upper class stratas of their society, neither of them act in ways that you would expect. So the Carrows are not particularly courteous, polite. Neither, of course, are the Peaches.
Yes. Also, can I just say, calling them the Peaches is so weird. It really does not register. Because Oliver and Lord Drek are most certainly not a peach.
They're not a peach, no. It's a nice anti-critilic name, Peaches.
There you go. All right, who else do we have left in our roster of baddies? Ooh, okay. Not quite villains per se, but Cormac McLagan and Pez Pierce.
Right, yes. So I was thinking of this, okay, I was talking to Irvin about Pez Pierce, and Irvin was saying, well, Pez isn't really a villain, but he is a schmuck. And I think that really epitomizes both of them, both Cormac McLagan and Pez Pierce. And I think that pretty clearly, I think Strike and Robin in this book, at least, are our Ron and Hermione. So Hermione / Robin goes on kind of a fake date with Pez / Cormac McLagan. And in both cases, it's like both Cormac and Pez think it's a real date, but both Hermione and Robin kind of know it's not a real date. And they're both kind of pushy physically towards the women in these dates. And both of them make Ron / Strike jealous. For Hermione, that was her whole purpose. For Robin, that wasn't the purpose, but that is the result. So I thought that was an interesting parallel, which also kind of made sort of connected with the Lavender Madeline parallel. Irvin, did you want to talk about that briefly?
I kind of want to talk about Cormac and Pez, yes. Because I think that makes a lot of sense. So, the part I was most uncomfortable reading in all of Ink Black Heart is her date with Pez, when Pez keeps being like, why aren't you drinking? Why aren't you drinking? Because knowing the parallels of, you know, book 6 is book 6, I was 100% certain that he was Romilda, and I was 100% certain he was going to roofie Robin. Like, I thought that was our love potion parallel. And so, like, those couple pages, I was like, no. And when Robin drank it, and I was like, no! Oh, my God. And then And then nothing happened. she drank it, and that was that. And I was like, but what? Like, is this parallel series a lie? Are we not doing this? Like, I was never so certain of anything, and then just, yeah. But this makes a lot more sense, because at the Slug Club party, right, we see Cormac, like, pursuing Hermione, and she's, like, trying to ditch him under the mistletoe, and she's, like, fleeing him at every turn. And that makes a lot more sense, where just, like, yes, they're schmucks, and yes, like, they have issues with consent, but it's played, a little more humorously and not that seriously, and not as dire as, a roofie or a love potion would be.
Right.
So yes, this makes sense, and I am now more okay with that scene, because I was not okay with it.
Okay. We have the advantage of knowing Robin's inner monologue.
Yes.
So Robin is conscious that she's playing a part. And when there are decision points, that, well, Robin wouldn't do this, but her character, her part would. So she's conscious and she's aware, and I never really got the feeling that she was putting herself in a position of danger. And of course, it's having all the other unintended effects that I suspect she might have wanted, with Strike being aware that she, although she doesn't have a boyfriend, she is now more functioning. She is capable of being in that space.
Yeah. I guess for me, as someone who A, doesn't date much, and B, doesn't drink, the whole, like, drink, why aren't you drinking thing, like, that just registered as all kinds of red flags for me.
There is, of course, in Half-Blood Prince, there's a different one of that, which is Harry getting Slughorn drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
So there's another
but he doesn't need
less problematic.
He doesn't need to convince Slughorn to drink. Like,
no, but he does keep refilling the glasses magically.
Yeah. Yes.
So they are sort of fuller than they should.
Yeah. But Slughorn needs no reminders.
Yeah. It's not non-consensual, but it is slightly pushing him towards, being more drunk than he had intended to be.
Yeah.
I also think Pez and McLagan just have a similar kind of big ego, arrogant, like, energy to them.
Yeah, they're very confident in their own appeal.
Yes.
Yeah. On slim reasoning. I like, he makes Squawk look like a gentleman.
Yes.
Yep. 'Tis true. And yeah, so if we're talking about rival, love interests, if not villains, Lavender Brown and Madeline are the other obvious parallels, right, for Strike and Ron. And I feel like I'm in a little bit of a minority here, where, like, I didn't mind Madeline much. Like, if anything, I thought sort of Strike was the bad guy in that relationship.
I don't think you have to decide for either. Strike is definitely behaving unacceptably. It's yet another fake relationship that he's just going in to use a woman for sex.
Right, like,
to try and distract his feeling Robins. It's like, he did that last time, Trouble Blood. I thought that was over.
Yeah. Right, like,
not another one.
How many times are we going to relearn the brothels and restaurants lesson?
Exactly. So, yeah, Strike is completely unacceptable, but I do think Madeline is coded. So, for me, the first date they have, she's rude to the waiter for no reason.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Yeah. And you're just like, that's a little code for, we don't have to feel too sorry for Madeline.
Yes.
She doesn't do anything else particularly wrong, but she's clearly, sort of using Strike for the same reason he's using her.
And
as a stress reliever.
High strung and high maintenance, yeah.
I like her son. That was a nice, he was a fun character, just a sort of, sort of view into another world. We don't see that much of him, but I liked him. And that was obviously a good sign for Madeline, both that Henry was kind of fun and that she had a good relationship with her ex and stuff. So she's a very civilized person, I think, in most ways.
I also think her son made Strike a lot more likable, where just like, he comes in as like the guy screwing his mom, and like he handles it very, very well, where he's like, welp, I know you're not thrilled, like I'm not gonna like try to be friends with you, but like,
that's right. So Strike is recognizing himself in that, and therefore empathizing with the boy. Now admittedly he's empathizing from a position of having totally experienced that himself, so it doesn't take that much empathy.
Yes.
But it is nice to see him seeing it from that perspective.
Yeah.
I also think that, I think this is actually also sort of a Jane Austen comparison. I think both Rowling and Jane Austen are really talented at using dialogue to tell you a lot about a character. They just let the character just talk and talk and talk and talk. And that was something I noticed about Madeline from the very first date that we saw her on, is she just talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And it was all about her, and it was all about her problems. And she never seemed to care about Strike at all, or really.
She did a little bit. So, when he's does his leg in. So she has the sort of thing where she asks about him. So they have a sort of initial bits where she asks about him and do you need food? And so she does some stuff, but then that's the prologue to her monologue. Exactly. Then he sits back with a cigarette and waits for the monologue to wash over him.
Which is very Lavender with Harry, when Ron is poisoned.
Sure.
And she just keeps the corner of him and being like, so we need to have an in-depth conversation about what Ron thinks of my dress.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that from the very beginning, I didn't like Madeline because of that dialogue. And I thought that was cleverly done, because it's not like Strike being like, oh, she's so annoying, she's talking all the time about herself. But I was just watching her and being like, oh, this is terrible. Like, she just cannot stop talking about herself. So.
And I think also that there's not respecting his boundaries. So he makes it very clear he doesn't want to be photographed. He has a very good reason for not wanting to be photographed.
Yeah.
And then she's not really paying any attention to that and slightly inveigling him into a situation at the end of her launch where it'll happen again. Because you're looking hot, so you'll make me look good in a photograph. It is a narcissistic, Charlotte-like aspect to her. So yes. I think she definitely has. We're definitely meant to feel less sympathetic. With Lorelei was the classic sort of, she's really nice, she doesn't deserve Strike to treat her this way. And we're getting sort of further
where Madeline
away.
is really less nice, but also doesn't deserve to be treated that way.
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. She doesn't deserve to be treated this way, but neither is she. That doesn't make her a nice person. Objectively, but
which the narcissism and wanting to show them off, that's very much like Lavender and her my sweetheart necklace.
Yeah.
For Madeline,
the
jewelry
really thought
maker.
About whether exactly in the necklace, I suppose, the jewelry collection. She's not thought about whether Ron would like to wear this.
Yeah.
And I suppose some of that, it was the thing about the blood diamonds as well, where she was very defensive about that, and you felt, well, there is an aspect that maybe you should be engaging with this idea a bit more.
Yeah.
And again, also the friend who's committed suicide, I felt she was upset, but she wasn't terribly upset. She's like, I'm going to use this for my next collection. I was like, is that really the right reaction to this? So, there's a lot of unsympathetic aspects to Madeline.
But I think that's really needed, because we do now have a pattern, a pattern of bad behaviour.
Exactly. We know you're just going to be treated incredibly badly, so we mustn't feel too much sympathy.
Yeah.
No, I'm really hoping this is over.
I know.
Yeah. Me too.
That's honestly one of the things that bumped Ink Black Heart a bit down in my ratings, is just it felt so much like treading water after Troubled Blood, where it's like, oh, we need to get rid of Charlotte again. Strike needs to learn to treat women decently again.
No, I had exactly the same feeling of and it's just like the Rokeby, so I was sure. So Troubled Blood, we had loads of time was spent on Rokeby, and I thought, okay, well, the only excuse for this is that there's a big reveal of what Rokeby knew in the next one, and then there's nothing about Rokeby at all in Ink Black Heart. So I was like, So there's stuff we thought I thought I was having something set up, and it wasn't. Part of me does wonder this thing about when she originally said it was 7 books, and now clearly it's not 7 books, whether things are being stretched at this point, where things that would have been done in this book, not, like 5 and 6, some of the reveals that would have happened in just 5 if there'd been 7, but now they're sort of 10 plus. It's being spread out a bit. So the reason the plot replays is related to that. It seems possible.
Yeah. So, actually, talk of the, rival love interest. Romilda Vane, she's the one I've been struggling a bit with, because she's such... aside from, the, main mysteries and plot and all that of Half-Blood Prince, she's such a big part of the, day-to-day nonsense that they're dealing with. And so in a book like Ink Black Heart that's all focused on relationships and issues of consent and all that, it's weird that there isn't a more clear-cut Romilda Vane parallel, I think.
Hugh Jacks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond, he's into Robin and won't take the hint. Like,
won't take no for an answer, and then is quite problematic at the time when you finally.
No drug chocolates, but
yeah.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, but we've had them already, haven't the drug chocolates of
right. That's like
blood,
last year.
That's been done.
There's also a little bit of Kia and even in there too. I mean, it's kind of the same thing of just sort of stalking Josh a little bit and not taking no for an answer.
It's true, although Josh is he does go out.
Right, he does.
So, it's a little bit different.
Different. Yeah, maybe
Robin's
it's Hugh
sort
Jack's.
of clarity. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's definitely people who will not be not accept boundaries in that sense. Yeah.
I guess there's just a lot of that, so don't need a specific Romilda one.
That's why she's spreading her miasma over the whole. All the guys in the Twitter handles are all
Romilda.
So, we were talking about Kia and her parallels. And Sophia, I know you really wanted to find a parallel for Kia in this book. So we have two suggestions. My suggestion is Kia is Snape because they are both obsessed with an X.
Okay.
That's it. That's
it.
All I got for that one. That is the extent of my insightful analysis there.
Sure they are.
Sophia, what have you come up with?
I just said maybe Romilda. I don't know. I haven't come up with anything.
What about her as Harry, the real villain of the piece?
Right.
Because in their respective book sixes, both Harry and Kia try to take credit for other people's work.
I was joking about this yesterday. I don't actually believe it, but they do. Or actually that's not completely, well, it is true. But the difference is that Kia is claiming that someone else is taking credit for her work. So she's in a roundabout way taking credit for someone else's work. But she is claiming that it is someone else stealing from her. Whereas from Harry, he is taking someone else's work and claiming it as his own. So there are some parallels there.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that does connect to the whole Snape-Kia thing, is that Snape is the one being stolen from, and Kia is theoretically the one being stolen from, even though she isn't really.
So based on whether you believe Kia that she came up with Ink Black Heart, she's either Harry or Snape.
Either Harry or Snape.
There we go.
A perfect parallel.
Although it's a minor point, but I would argue Harry isn't trying to take credit from someone else's work. He's just using a better textbook.
Sure, but he's claiming that the inspirations are his own. Like, he's not... Yeah, it's...
When Slughorn is like, you thought of adding mint to the potion. It must be your innate potioneer.
Yeah, and he's not like, actually, I got this suggestion from the book and can't really take full credit. He's like, that was me, my genius. I mean, I think it's different than, full on just completely stealing someone else's work, but I think that he's at an unfair advantage because he has this better textbook that nobody knows about, and he's not disclosing that to anyone, that he has that.
He's conscious of that, and he's concealing. Yes, you're right. Yes.
Yes.
And Nick, you actually had a fun one for Inigo and who we can, turn him into.
Oh, crumbs. Yeah. Well, So the sort of the key moment, certainly when I read for the first time, is of course the death of Dumbledore. So apparently at the first release there were idiots driving around in cars shouting. This was the spoiler. They were shouting at the queues of people.
Yeah,
Dumbledore is dead. So I was reading Ink Black Heart. I was waiting for the death of this Dumbledore character, and actually on Hogwarts Professor, it's one of the things that has given rise, Louise Freeman has given rise to a flip idea, is actually we do get a significant parental figure death in Troubled Blood.
Yes.
Whereas we would expect it in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And we only really get 2 recurring characters that die. And I agree they are both pivotal for the series. It's Wolfgang, of course.
The dog.
I admit to shedding a tear over Wolfgang. I was getting quite attached. And, of course, one of the very early characters, the farting sofa, sadly is no more.
That is quite sad.
Yes. Sofa can't be Dumbledore.
No,
really?
Definitely not.
I don't know. They have a similar sense of humor. I totally could imagine.
That is true. That is true.
Dumbledore creating a farting sofa just to laugh about.
No, because when Dumbledore creates furniture, it's always really squishy and comfortable. So no, Dumbledore would never be a farting sofa. He would be, a chintz armchair.
Sure.
Well, we know Slughorn does have previous form as soft furnishings, so
yes.
Could be Slughorn.
But yeah, the only significant character death that we spend any time with is Inigo. Now, although we see him in real life and he is this poisonous, toxic, horrible character, that is not who he appears in his online life. So this website, and my Latin is dreadful, so I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, but the website he has set up to help chronic illness sufferers, he is this kindly sage older presence. He to the people that are online, he could be this Dumbledore figure.
Yeah, I always viewed his work at that Latin thing that I also can't pronounce, as much more of a Slughorn figure, because I don't think it's so much he's like dispensing sage wisdom. It's not like, it doesn't feel altruistic entirely. I feel like it's a way for him to like have the status and esteem and expertise that like he thinks he is due. So I think it's actually much more Slughornish. The fact that he's like, yes, dispensing advice and helping all these poor unfortunate souls, but I think he's in it for the adulation, which is, almost as good as crystallized pineapple.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I think if we're going down the Dumbledore route for a moment, I think there's an interesting, okay, we've talked about Gus as potentially being sort of a Draco figure, and I think the way that Draco views Dumbledore is maybe kind of more along the lines of how Gus views Inigo. So if we're sort of looking from that perspective, Draco is looking at Dumbledore and saying, like, he's always, like, showing favoritism towards the Gryffindors. He's always, like, showing favoritism towards Muggleborns. He's always, he basically is just doesn't care about, Slytherins and Pure-Bloods like me. He's just, he is power-hungry, has all of this control, and isn't using it well. So maybe from Draco's vision of Dumbledore, it's not necessarily an accurate vision, but it might be sort of more along those lines.
Counterpoint, he also feels that way about Slughorn. Like, Draco expects favoritism from Slughorn and is very miffed when he doesn't receive it, and is very mad when Slughorn is unimpressed with his potion making. And I feel like by Half-Blood Prince, Draco doesn't expect anything from Dumbledore, right? Like, sort of, like, Dumbledore would have no reason to show him any favoritism. Whereas Slughorn is like, he's the Slytherin professor of potions. Of course he should, love me and favor me the way, a father should love and favor his son, like Gus Upcott. So, you know what? The more we talk about it, the more I'm leaning into Inigo is Slughorn.
Right. And he made a point yesterday about, it's a little bit silly, but like the wheelchair and Slughorn, we first meet him as a chair, it's not exactly the most intellectual connection.
There is also the chair connection.
But I don't know. Yeah, I think there is something to be said about that. And maybe from Gus's point of view, okay, I'm taking this even further. Okay, from Gus's point of view, so we see how Inigo is really kind to Kia and shows this sort of favoritism and is very gentle towards her. Mm-hmm. And from Gus's point of view, Gus/Draco's point of view, they're looking at Inigo and being like, wait, you're supposed to pay attention to me and care about me. Like, I'm the person who's in your house, Slytherin, or in your house, as in literally your son. Like, you're supposed to be showing that kindness towards me, and you're showing this kindness towards this random person. So maybe that is, Kia is Harry.
Yeah. Kia is Harry. Yes, we've solved it. We've cracked the code.
Well done.
I mean, okay, now that we've solved that, any other parallels coming to mind, or have we just about done it?
I think I'm tapped.
All right. Well, listeners, we would all love to hear about any other parallels you find between these two books. You know, which villains did we miss? Which parallels did we get completely wrong? Please let us know in the comments. So, huge thank you to our guests. Huge thank you to Beatrice. It was so great having you and all of your, knowledge of every book ever written and everything that Jo is referencing in her works. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed coming to the Three Broomsticks, and I do hope I'll get invited back.
Oh, every time we talk about Cormoran Strike, we're going to need you here, just so you know. Is there anything you want to plug? Anywhere listeners can find you on the internet?
Yes, I am on Twitter, the Hellscape, as Jo calls it in Ink Black Heart. She calls it a modern hell in one of her epigraphs. I was like, that's not very positive. But yeah, so I'm on Twitter. And I've also got a blog at MuggleNet, Batilda's Notebook. And I've written a book, if you're interested in more Harry Potter things, called Literary Illusion in Harry Potter.
Now we just have to say, Nick, thank you so, so much for visiting us here at the Three Broomsticks. It's been absolutely wonderful actually getting to talk to you and just having you on for this.
Yes, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, guys. It really has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Yes. Anything you want to plug or anywhere listeners can follow you?
You can find me at hogwartsprofessor.com. And you will also find me on Twitter if you really like photographs of the countryside in the Vale of Glamorgan.
Which, who doesn't?
Exactly.
All right. Listeners, if you want to help us make more fun content like this, please head over to patreon.com/3broomsticks with the number 3 to sign up for our Patreon, where we are offering bonus content. We just released a thing about the theme parks, and I think by the time this episode comes out, there will be talk of Hogwarts Legacy on there. There's chats with the hosts, on episode shoutouts, and all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of administrative expenses, websites, hosting fees, all that jazz involved in keeping the lights on here. So we'd really appreciate your help in supporting the podcast. And also, if you like our show, tell your friends, rate and review us wherever you're listening. Word of mouth really is a big help for us when we're starting out, and we'd love to see it. And in the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on all of the social media. We are on the hellscape of Twitter at 3broompod, at 3broomstickspod on Facebook, and at 3broomstickspodcast on Instagram. And all those are spelling out the word. You can also shoot us an email at 3broomstickspod@gmail.com. That's with the number 3. And of course, our website, 3broomstickspod.com, with the 3 spelled out. You will have links to all of the essays we mentioned. You can tell us what you want to hear us talk about. And of course, you can leave all your comments on these episodes. Next time we meet at the Three Broomsticks, we're going to be continuing our series of looking at the 3rd chapter of each book by discussing Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 3, The Burrow. So with that, I've been Irvin.
I'm Sophia. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Cheers!
Give me big old buckets of butter beer. Give me big old barrels of butter beer. Give me the drink I love so dear, and another round for my friend right here. Give me big old buckets of butter beer. Give me big old barrels of butter beer. Give me the drink I love so dear, and another round for my friend right here of the sweet old butter beer.
This episode of The Three Broomsticks was edited by Patrick Musilek. The theme song was written and performed by the Faithful Sidekicks. Make sure to check them out at thefaithfulsidekicks.com.
Oh no! I mean, I'm glad Bea finished her very good point, but
I think that was a mic drop moment, I think.
yes, yeah, that was quite literally a mic drop.
Okay, I've got my DMs open, but I guess if her internet is dropped.
Skype just turned me off. I'm sorry. I don't know why that was.
That's okay. Yeah, Audacity's still going,
Audacity's still going, but obviously I've been silent. But but yeah, Audacity's still going. So the audio person can just pretend that didn't happen.
You finished your very good point, and dropped the mic. It was great. Oh no! The internet strikes again. Yeah, Sophia, Bea has been having internet issues.
Oh no.
Any luck?
Bea's DM'd. Skype is down, retrying. So I think she's got internet, just trouble with Skype.
Ah, okay. Yeah, no, Skype it is what it is. The problem is all the other programs. Hello.
Skype doesn't like me today. It's just...
Yeah. No, we don't love Skype, but all the other programs require you to go off after 45 minutes.
Yeah,
Google Hangouts and Zoom and all, so...
I feel like that's what it's doing to me, but only to me.
Yeah, your Skype is like, let's go.